Good afternoon, all, and welcome once again to another edition of the Sal Greco Show, and I'm your host, Sal Greco. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope everyone had a good weekend. You had a nice couple of days, enjoying the dog days of summer, as we like to say. Thank you all for tuning in once again. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like, share, subscribe button. Hit that notification button as well. If you're watching us on Rumble, please hit that like button, hit the Rumble button. And if you're watching us on X streaming live right now, please hit that like button, also the repost button, and share this out to all your friends, especially those in the low information bubble, because they need to be up to speed with a lot of things. But today is going to be very interesting. As you know, last Thursday, I had Eric Sanders on, and it was a bombshell article that we covered. And this is from City and State right there. And it featured something that we are now coming to learn, and there's a lot more info from this, but this was an investigation about unlicensed psychologists performing assessments of NYPD candidates. But it also involves personnel, meaning cops, whoever has seen psychiatrists in New York City Police Department, whether it's recent or we're now learning it goes back 4 decades. You might have seen an unlicensed psychiatrist. Therefore, you more than likely have a lawsuit. So I had reached out, I reached out to Kelly Grace Price, who wrote this article from City and State, and then she says, I'll definitely come on Tuesday. And she has documents and data that was not shown or spoken of in this article. So without any further ado, let's have Kelly Grace Price from City and State on the stage. How are you, Kelly?
Hi, Sal. So nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry if there's a little Wi-Fi glitch. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I hear you. We hear you loud and clear. And I guess we'll have a slight delay just to make up for that issue. It looks like there's a glitch. Modern day technology, folks. Modern day technology. Wi-Fi. Probably it's in New York City. That's been the issue. So on this article that we were going to discuss, there's been a lot of chatter also in regards to the statute that they're trying to reference, because the NYPD said there's an exemption. I mean, this right here, it'll show you that the state statute calls for only fully licensed or board permitted psychologists in police psychological assessment roles. Additionally, the state municipal police training council guidelines require only fully licensed psychologists be permitted to evaluate the psychological fitness of potential police candidates. Okay. And then later on in this article, it'll go into the state, the education board, and they state that there are no exemptions. I know you have people out there trying to run cover for not only the police department, but the state. There are no exemptions to this. I believe the only exemptions were, it's a technical term. It's got to have 2 years in there, but it applies only to schools, education. It doesn't apply to New York City Police Department. They don't fall under this municipal or municipalities. All of that is not a legal term. It would not stand up in court. And there's actually witnesses and people that come on from the state that know and would say that is 100% true what I'm saying. Yes, the article goes on to say, this is from Eric Sanders, if you remember who was on. The NYPD has knowingly allowed unlicensed individuals to pose as psychologists conducting evaluations disqualifying candidates and making career-altering decisions in a direct violation of New York State education law. And that's the most important part of the entire section. And I'll be honest, Eric's been quite busy when it comes to making comments about this. So I don't know if we could pull up some things that he's been saying, because it goes along with this, because there's been a lot of chatter and trying to deflect and trying to stray away from the issues, especially, I'd say, what is New York City Police Department very good at? They're very good at their minions smearing people and then discrediting you by the smears. They do it with many people. They have henchmen in the media, and they like to do this. So I'm going to just pull up something, because Eric has been very adamant about this stuff. I mean, here's something he posted recently. Policing the mind, how the NYPD's use of unlicensed psychologists violates state law, undermines civil rights, and compromises public trust. Theses. This thought piece examines how the New York City Police Department has systematically circumvented New York State licensing laws to employ unlicensed individuals as psychologists, conducting fitness evaluations that directly impact the careers and civil rights of thousands. Drawing on education law 7605, 6512, and 6513, as well as federal mandates, the Uniform Guidelines on Employee Selection Procedures, USGESP, which he's been writing about a lot, by the way. This essay reveals a pattern of legal evasion, institutional retaliation, and historical misuse of psychological screening as a tool of social control. Though the case study of Marquise Anderson and parallels to the NYPD's misuse of sealed records, it exposes how the department's actions not only violate the law, but inflict lasting psychological harm. Disproportionately affected protected class applicants and erode public trust. Ultimately, this analysis calls for urgent intervention, legal, what's that word there? Political, and institutional to restore legitimacy, enforce compliance, and safeguard the rights of those subjected to unlawful evaluation practices. So you see, Eric's been on the money with a lot of this stuff. He's given out a lot of legal, not only legal opinions, but legal. He's speaking, for the legalities of this and what this means. Because it's not just like one. We can't look at like one thing where they're homing in on these different statutes, like 7605 and whatever it is that the numbers that they've been saying. But he's been telling, like, here's another one. Don't fall for the red herring certification, legal compliance. Some are now pointing to Governor Hochul's announcement that all New York police agencies are certified under the Professional Policing Act of 2021, as if that somehow legally justifies the NYPD use of unlicensed individuals to conduct psychological evaluations. And then he'll go on here, because that is something that they're trying to say, but then he states the facts here. So he says, that's a red herring. It's a distraction, a PR shield, which is what I agree with, and legally meaningless when it comes to licensure requirements under New York State education law. Here are the facts. The Professional Policing Act mandates agencies submit documentation affirming minimum hiring practices. It does not verify whether those performing psychological evaluations are licensed, permitted, or supervised under the law. See, there's something you need to learn there, especially if you're in the New York City or NYPD Legal Bureau. Meanwhile, Education Law 7605 says only licensed psychologists of those with a limited permit under active supervision can conduct psychological assessments. Education Law 6512 makes unauthorized practice a Class E felony. Education Law 6513 makes unauthorized title use, psychologist, doctor, a Class A misdemeanor or felony, depending on the facts. No amount of certification under DCJS negates or overrides criminal licensing laws, and no amount of political spin will change the fact that using unlicensed evaluations to disqualify police applicants, especially without transparency, is unlawful. So let's be clear. The certification narrative is a smokescreen, not a shield. It's not compliance. It's cover. Eric here states something I didn't know. I've already filed 4 requests and began advising individuals to file formal complaints with the New York State Education Department. The law is clear. The red herrings are obvious, and accountability is coming. So I think you heard a lot there. That could be, that could be quite troublesome for the New York State Police Department. So let's see if we have Kelly back, and that Wi-Fi issue has been fixed. I don't know. I hate modern technology. Sometimes
just to step in here real quick for everyone watching, we're having some technical difficulties, and I'm gonna give Kelly a call, and I'm gonna have her try and call Sal, and we're gonna do it that way because it seems like she's having Wi-Fi issues and the video function is incompatible. So just stand by, everyone. We're gonna work on it, and we're gonna try and get her up on the show in a couple minutes here.
There you have it, folks. Legal. All I can say is modern technology is brutal. What can I tell you? Bring back the 80s. What can I say? Well, I'm going to continue with more stuff because Eric has been on the money here. Were you, and this is another post that he has, were you psychologically evaluated by the NYPD between 2015 and today? This is only the first wave of a sweeping investigation into what may be one of the most widespread unlawful screening practices in NYPD history. Starting this week, we're collecting evidence from all individuals screened out or screened in by NYPD psychological evaluators between 2015 and 2025. We're especially looking for cases involving disqualification after being labeled psychologically unfit, sudden reversals after passing an earlier psych evaluation, medical desk referrals to mental health evaluators following illness or injury, unlicensed or unverified screeners conducting your evaluation, ambiguous or unexplained findings leading to disqualification, no opportunity for appeal or evaluation transparency. Why it matters. From 2015 to 2025, the NYPD has employed people using the title psychologist who, according to public records, were not licensed or board permitted under New York education law 7605, 6512, and 6513. These individuals made fitness determinations that shaped careers, revoked civil service eligibility, and damaged reputations. This is a civil rights crisis, not a paperwork error, but this is only phase 1. We will expand the investigation all the way back to January 1980, the earliest confirmed period of NYPD's use of unlicensed evaluators, documenting the long arc of statutory non-compliance and institutional harm. If you are evaluated by NYPD psych personnel at any point between 2015 and today, and especially if you remember their name, title, or evaluation outcome, we want to hear from you. Your story could help the NYPD accountable, hold the NYPD accountable, and protect others from unlawful disqualification. Help us uncover the truth. Help us stop this. That is from Eric Sanders. If you were a victim of this, I highly suggest you give Eric a call. So no, and somebody here, HXC says, what about prior to 2015? I doubt this started in 2015. You are right. It is not from 2015. It goes back a lot further. There's a lot of people this has affected. Let me see what's going on here. Because we're having issues trying to get our back on with this Wi-Fi stuff, Like I said, modern technology is not the greatest. I don't know why you could clearly have somebody come on and then I guess that's how the way it used to work. So let me see here. Let me see. I guess she's gonna try to call, patch in. Let me see how this is here. There's also more, by the way, with Eric Sanders here, because he did file a FOIA request. So, all right, Kelly, can you hear me?
Sorry about the technical difficulties. How are you today?
How are you? Okay. All right. That's much better. Sorry, people, for the technical glitches, but that is Kelly on the phone right now, which is the only way we could actually have this done this way. So, Kelly, before we started, I gave a little bit of some legalities there coming from Eric, who's been covering this. So I just wanted you to give a brief thing. You came up with all this work. How did this come about? And then explain the way, what your findings were and what led you to even research something like this that apparently everybody seemed to have forgotten about in the New York City Police Department.
Sure. I had originally wanted to kind of reverse the order, but I'm happy to talk about how I started working on this topic anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I'm really happy to. So I was assigned the piece by my editor, and by the way, I'm appearing on the show today as myself, as a independent freelance journalist, not as a representative of City and State New York. But my editor at City and State had assigned Ralph Ortega, is a great guy, a super mentor and a great steward of my work, assigned the piece to me because he had been approached by someone in the unions flagging that there was something going on in the background behind the story regarding Inspector Anderson's reversals of 80 psychological assessments by the Candidate Assessment Division, and that maybe some reporter might want to poke around in the data. And so I went off. That's the only reason my editor assigned me this piece, because I'm really good with data. And I went off looking actually for data about demographics of people that passed the psychological exam. And I found out that there really hasn't been any tracked by the department ever. I might or might not have heard that recently they've started to do that, but I haven't been able to prove that. And so I started looking at the other data. Everything's out there in the open on either New York City open data or other government resources where you can pull information about city employees. So it took me let's just say it took me no small amount of enormous work to pull the data together, because the way that the data is out on New York City open data under the Department of Citywide Administrative Services that puts out reports on every New York City employee. There were two different reports that overlapped with two different timeframes, and they describe New York City employees in different name formats and with different kinds of information. So I had to smush those reports together to pull a list of psychologists that work for the NYPD. And it's not so easy. You have to know the title codes for every different type of employee, but you can go find a title code list. And if you're handy with Excel, you can pull down this data. So I had a subset of about a little over 100 psychologists that I found to work for the NYPD within the last dozen years. That's only as far back as the data went. So that was only as far back as our analysis went. And from there, I had to figure out which psychologists work in different units. And understanding that there are different units that hire psychologists for different reasons in the NYPD is a crucial part of understanding the legal framework to what was going on over there as well. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just saying that that's something we'll come back to. So put a pin in that there's different units, different psych units. There's the medical unit that hires psychologists and employs them to tend to the uniform staff. And there's the CAD unit that hires psychologists to tend, of course, to the psychological assessments for the people that are not through the academy yet, or even into the academy yet. And I was specifically looking at that subset, just the CAD psychologists. By the way, like everything when you start investigating, there's never one clear-cut line. For instance, I learned that psychologists in the candidate assessment unit also go out into the field on a rotating basis. Every psychologist is assigned like an emergency rotating spot to respond to events in the field, like the shooting in Midtown. Some psychologist that was on a rotating list showed up at the precinct in Midtown, and maybe even at the SRG unit afterwards to assess and give counsel to the people who had experienced those traumatic events in the department. And so the CAD psychologists aren't just limited to working on the candidate assessments. They also, on this rotating basis, might pop up in your precinct and give counsel to people after a stressful event. So just FYI. And this specific group of candidates, of psychologists, I was looking very carefully at to see what their credentials were. And when I cross-referenced the candidate, I beg your pardon, the psychologist's credentials on the Office of the State Department of Education's verification tool in their Office of Professions, I realized that a very large number, 55 of 74 of the psychologists that I had identified as working in CAD, and that was a lot of research. I had to talk to a lot of people, look at a lot of LinkedIn's, and so 74 psychologists in the CAD, 55 of them did not have full licenses. And some of them got licenses while they were there, but many of them didn't. So I posed a very simple question to the NYPD asking, what's going on with this? These people don't appear to have licenses or permits. If they were working on permits, their permits have expired in some cases. They've worked past the 3-year extension limit that the Department of Education extends for permits. What's going on here? And instead of responding, I got, maybe a week's worth of, oh, we didn't get the emails. Can you send us a list? Oh, we didn't get that email with the list. I got a lot of, two-stepping back from the communications department at the NYPD. So I knew that when they start throwing every trick in the book at you from the jump, that you've identified something that's sensitive.
Of course.
Also I had researched the laws, and I was talking to a lot of people about the laws and the exemptions. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not out here to say someone did something wrong. I'm out here to legally. I'm not here just to show that, look, there's this group of psychologists that don't have full licensure. And even if there weren't laws governing that, maybe unions do or don't have problems with that. And there's, like you were discussing at the top of the show, there's federal laws and there's state laws that both apply in these circumstances. And which group of psychologists made assessments at what time and are still people have actionable complaints. I leave that to the lawyers. That's not for me to discuss. That's for the lawyers to discuss. But nonetheless, we had identified this group of people that didn't have full licenses, and we wanted an explanation from the department. And eventually, maybe like a week and a half later, instead of committing it to writing, I got a text from someone in the department, Delaney Kempner, the deputy commissioner for communications, I think is her title. I got a text from her with a link to all the exemptions under the Department of Education saying, we're exempt because of this first sentence and this first exemption. And I checked it out with lawyers, and they all said, no, this doesn't apply to this specific unit of psychologists that do the candidate assessment, because there's this other law out there, the NYCRR section 6000 that you discussed, and Eric Sanders has discussed ad nauseum, that specifies that police evaluations have to be done by fully licensed psychologists. So I already knew that there was another law out there. And look, anyone that's done any kind of advocacy or work in politics in New York State knows that laws are not unchecked, that they're just not passed in Albany without being cross-referenced to make sure that they're not in conflict with other laws. So after checking with lawyers, I was very sound in knowing that this group of psychologists in the CAD were supposed to be operating under the NYCRR, and they should only be fully licensed. And I didn't get a straight answer from the department. They wouldn't commit into writing exactly what they were saying. And I kept emailing saying, please call me, let's discuss this. And instead of calling me and discussing this with me, my editor was called. And, you know, it's not my editor's job to understand every tiny nuance of a story and to be able to speak on it when someone just calls him out of the blue on his cell phone when he's out at lunch. That's my job. And instead of, you know, coming back and forth with me, the path the department chose was to try and scare my editor into thinking that he was going to get slapped with a defamation lawsuit if we went forward with this story. And I was very confident because I knew that the NYCRR not only predicated that police psychologists have to be fully licensed to do evaluations, but that the NYCRR was quite new. It was only passed in 2021. It was one of the premier pieces of legislation that Governor Hochul passed as soon as she got into office. The bill numbers that it was under didn't even have Senate or legislative sponsors because the bill was literally sponsored by the governor's office. And the governor's office and the Department of Criminal Justice Services, which is a state agency, had even given all police departments a 2-year leeway for that law to kick in for them so that they could make all the changes that they needed. There were a lot of other, that law is very complicated, and the Professional Policing Act has a lot of stuff in it. But just one of the tiny little things, which is very big, it's foundational to public safety, is that fully licensed psychologists have to be making these evaluations. And even though the 2-year leeway had come and gone, it expired on October 16th, 2023, the department and the CAD was still hiring people in that period where they're supposed to be getting rid of psychologists or making sure that they're licensed. They hired 9 people between 2021 when the law passed and they got their exemption until now. They hired 9 people that weren't fully licensed. So the department wasn't even trying to come into compliance. It just kept doing what it had been doing for years and hiring students out of grad school. And I was really confused by this. We tried very hard to get answers in earnest, and we were met with bullying. And we were more than happy to bend over because this was such to bend over backwards, I beg your pardon. Yeah. This was such a serious answer. My editor said, look, we're going to extend the NYPD every single chance that they need to respond properly because this is such a serious issue. And we did. We gave them almost 2 weeks leeway to hold the story. In the background, the NYPD is putting out puff pieces about, how their next academy class has such great demographics. They were doing everything they could to get out ahead of the story. And then we finally had to pull the trigger and publish the story, even though NYPD had again, I guess, asked my editor for more time for us to publish the story until time could be scheduled on the phone for everybody to get on the phone and discuss the laws. And I knew that was just a stalling tactic. So I was really pushing my editor to open his eyes and not buy into the stalling. And then all of a sudden we realized that someone from the Post was texting our sources, asking about our story specifically. And we got screen grabs of the texts where the reporter literally said, hey, I need your comment about NYPD's unlicensed psychologists.
This is unbelievable.
And we knew
it's unbelievable you're saying it. It's unbelievable.
We knew that our story had been leaked, and so we had to pull the trigger. Like I said, there's a lot of different intricacies that go into trying to decide which state law or the federal law governs which candidates at what time went through the assessment. But the bottom line is, if there is some magical exemption, and let's just give the NYPD the benefit of the doubt and, say, okay, maybe there is some magical exemption that exempts the psychologists that are actually tending to the core, but not the psychologists that are tending to the candidates. But if there is some magical exemption as they're claiming, and let's, like I said, give them the benefit of the doubt, fine. There is some magical exemption that allows you to hire people that are not fully licensed to do evaluations for people in the field. My reaction to that I think is the same as any police officers. That's disrespectful to the field. And I don't think that people knew that it was going on. And I think that it's for the unions to put a stop to that, because the NYCRR doesn't predicate that the department had to stop by October 16th, 2023, using non-fully licensed psychologists, basically kids. Sal, I had sent you a recent job description that Alan Bloom, who's the chief psychologist in the medical unit, posted on his LinkedIn. And that, I don't know if you want to put that up on screen and show your audience, but that specific job posting says that kids with only a semester and a half towards their graduate degree can be hired for Psych 1 positions in the medical unit. So
that's incredible.
That's a whole nother story that needs to be written. And if I were in a police union or I were a police officer, I would definitely be calling my delegate and saying, what's up with this? Because I don't think people knew that. There's never been reporting on that, and there's still no fix to it. Like I said, there is supposedly a fix in the NYCRR for the candidate assessment officers being assessed before they're in the academy. The NYCRR is supposed to say, and they're supposed to follow it, that they're only using fully licensed psychologists, but they're still not doing it. And that in itself, as Eric Sanders has said, and as other lawyers have said to me, that is very actionable under the state law. And then also there's the uniform standards, which is federal law. And I don't think there's even a statute of limitations on that federal civil rights filing. Even if someone was evaluated 20 years ago, I mean, Section 1983 civil rights lawsuits are supposed to have a 3-year statute of limitations, but there is a case law about, it's called a continuing violation. And if you can prove that the situation is still continuing to this day, the statute of limitations has expired. And a lot of groups, for instance, here's an example everyone will remember in the news. Remember maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a group of descendants of the Black community members whose section of Oklahoma City had been razed a century ago, set on fire, and all the Black business owners were run out of that section of Oklahoma City. Their descendants, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, sued. And because they could prove that discrimination was still continuing, they were able to bring that civil rights lawsuit together as a class action. And I think they prevailed. So, there is precedent. That was just a case that was in the news recently that I thought your readers or your viewers might remember. But under this federal civil rights law, there potentially could be no statute of limitations. Someone has to prove, however, that the psychologists further back than what the data I was able to attain, that they were still using unlicensed psychologists back then, because the civil rights, that particular uniform standards code says that only qualified professionals can be used to evaluate professionals like police. I'm sorry, I stepped on your word.
No, I'm saying because you see this chart that we had on the screen, because what I wanted to get into is this is money. This is allocated. This right here is, first of all, I see 4 people that have no license, says permit on file with Office of Professions, no. And it also states on the end, I believe, overtime. So something you haven't even mentioned yet is these people are unlicensed so far, and you see right there, lowest overtime, highest overtime. Now, some of these people are making overtime, yet I believe you said 50,000 hours of these people that are unlicensed. They're not doctors. They're not psychologists. All of a sudden, though, they're making all this money. Yet that would depict a fraud on the taxpayer right here, no?
So I want to slow down a little bit. There's a distinction between someone not being fully licensed and not being a doctor. I think I heard Eric Sanders say on your show the other day, so-and-so, it wasn't a doctor. That person could have been a doctor. These people could be doctors. They could have fulfilled all the requirements for their PhDs. They just haven't passed their boards and become fully licensed under New York State to be a psychologist. There's a big difference between someone calling themselves a psychologist under the statute that, remember, we're giving the NYPD the benefit of the doubt in their interpretation of the exemptions. There's a big difference between someone who's hired by the department as a psychologist to perform these functions and called a psychologist under this exemption. that we're giving them under the benefit of the doubt, and someone who's fully licensed and also has graduated from graduate school with all the requirements. That includes clinical hours, your PhD, and your coursework completed, and passing boards. But someone could still be a psychologist. Like I said, I'll repeat myself. They could still be a doctor because they finished what's required with their educational institution to be a doctor. But that's very different than being fully licensed by the Board of Psychology of New York State. You have to pass your boards, and there might be a couple of other requirements in there too. If you go look, there might be like an interview. I forget what the other requirements are, but be careful when you're saying these people aren't doctors, because they very well could be doctors if they've finished their doctorate degree. Just for you to know, and I hope Eric is listening to me too. But to your original point, yeah, there are, and I hope you have my data up there, and all those spreadsheets are linked into the story as well for people to go look at. The overtime, I think, is a real problem because you have people working 80-hour weeks for months on end. How are these people possibly supervised? That was one of the questions we posed to the NYPD. How are these people supervised? And they even put in writing every decision by these unlicensed psychologists is signed off on by a supervisor. But there's no way that the supervisors could have read and signed off on every one of these decisions. If someone's sitting there doing 12-hour days, let's just say they're only doing 8 or 9 interviews during that day, and they spend the other 2 or 3 hours on paperwork, and you have 12 people sitting there doing that, you have dozens and dozens of evaluations the supervisor has to literally read and sign off on and watch the interview, and read all the notes and look at how the tests were graded, and write a report, read the reports. That was another thing I wanted to say. There's some other practices within the psychological assessment unit, the CAD, that are very questionable that I discovered. For instance, reports aren't even being written unless someone appeals. And according to the NYCRR, and I got this from 3 different people that I spoke to, more than 3, the former and current psychologists that work on the unit. And that's a really big problem. If you're only writing reports for people who have appealed and been NOPD'd, there's not a report on file for anyone that's currently in the department. I mean, there may be a few of them, but what I heard is these reports are not being written. And that's a really big problem. That's against the law. And maybe that's an offshoot of just them not having enough people to do the work. But regardless, it's not being done. There's a couple other things I wanted to kind of reveal that were cut out of the story, if you don't mind indulging me for this second.
This is the most important part, folks. So there are parts of Kelly's story that were cut out or weren't put in the article that she also has done extra work over the last couple of days to solidify this stuff. So please, Kelly, continue and let everyone know what they haven't read about yet.
And if you don't mind, please call me Grace. I go by my middle name. It's no harm, no foul. But I like to be called in my grandmother's name. So please, Grace.
Great.
But my legal name, my legal first name is Kelly. There were all kinds of things that were cut out for different reasons by the lawyers that reviewed my story. One of them that I heard from 4 different sources within the CAD is that Inspector Anderson's reversal of those 80 psychological assessments were allowed. He was allowed to do that under the NYCRR. He's allowed, the department is allowed, they have the last call on the psych assessment process. Just because one of the alleged psychologists made that assessment, the department is not beholden to it under the NYCRR. And not only are they not beholden, but when Inspector Anderson reversed those 80, he had every single one of them allegedly approved by Chief Benoit. And I even got a hold of the form It's like a digital form. Someone sent me a screen grab, and I sent it to you. I don't know if you want to put it up, but I got a hold of the form that shows that Inspector Anderson couldn't have even made those reversals if Chief Benoit hadn't signed off on them. Allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly, because I heard it and I see the form, but I wasn't able to get a hold of Chief Benoit to ask him, and so that my editors cut that out of the story. I did find a cell phone number for him, and I left a message. I'm not sure if it was his cell phone, but of course he didn't respond to me. But I was very curious about that. That was one revelation. The other was that the reports weren't being made. One other revelation was that, and I think that this was mentioned, that Eric Sanders mentioned it last week, that the lion's share of Inspector Anderson's reversals were of one particular psychologist's NOPDs. And allegedly, this particular psychologist is one of the people who doesn't have their full licensure, has worked years and years in the department without being licensed, has a very high rate of overtime, and also has not been able to pass their boards. So what I heard from people in the department was, isn't this Inspector Anderson's job to identify problems like this and to address them? And I don't really know what the answer. I think the department will have to answer that eventually. I would really love to hear a statement from the department or from City Hall about this process or how they're going to fix it moving forward. It feels to me like maybe when it was identified that Inspector Terrell had made these reversals, the investigation didn't go very far into the department's practices, because I feel like putting Inspector Terrell in the spotlight like this, and this is just my own commentary, put a light on this particular issue that just unraveled a lot of other bigger problems with the CAD that it seems like Inspector Terrell was trying to fix. And the way that the reporting has been is that Inspector Terrell was even caught up in this because of Epps in this scandal with, that I don't even need to refer that. Your readers know exactly what I'm talking about.
It's her nephew.
And when they just, yeah, exactly. And when the department discovered that there was an email between Epps to Inspector Terrell asking Terrell to take a second look at her nephew, that was when people in the department went, aha, and thought, oh, we've uncovered all this corruption. There's this old boys network of higher ups that, get their nieces and nephews approved by just making a phone call. But in fact, that wasn't the case. There were a lot of follow-up interviews done. I spoke to psychologists that said that what Tyrell was doing was calling people back into have secondary interviews. He didn't just reverse. He really fought hard. And also, apparently, all of the reversals were approved by Inspector Gavan when he was around. I think it'll be really interesting.
Wait, you mean police?
Sorry, Chief.
Police commissioner.
Yeah.
Police commissioner.
Police commissioner. Thank you. I misspoke.
You mentioned October 23rd of 2023. It was Eddie Caban who was the police commissioner at that time, just so you know.
October 16th exactly was the deadline that all police departments in New York State had to comply with the NYCRR. And yes, it was Eddie Caban back then. And allegedly, he also approved every single one of the reversals. And I also heard that there were many times when Inspector Terrell was asked to do a reversal, and he spoke to the psychologist that did the original evaluation, and he looked at all the paperwork and he let it lay. It wasn't like every single one of them he was reversing. So I think that those are all really important, points to make. I was kind of shocked when I heard that someone else had signed off on the reversals and they also hadn't been brought up on department charges. I don't understand that. But I didn't really get my initial questions answered by the department. So it wasn't like they were up to answering a second and third round from me. So a lot of that stuff, because we hadn't had a chance to ask the department about, didn't make it into the story. Okay, so I've said a lot. Do you have any questions? Do you want me to back up?
Well, yeah. Well, first, I think you're courageous and even doing this because, as you laid out, just to go back to the very beginning, you were being, I guess, browbeated behind the scenes via your editor because Delaney, who's the head of DCPI and NYPD, they were pressuring your editor to cut this story out. And I believe Delaney's attached to the soccer mom, who's the police commissioner now, Jessica Tisch. So that's where the real pressure seems to have happened. And the fact that they want to do this to you, Grace, it appears to me there's a pattern in the police department of anyone who speaks out or has any kind of information that's damaging or something like this, where this is by far the biggest corruption scandal in the New York City Police Department in the last 30, 40 years, which that's the body of it right now. I mean, they try to kill your story and also give it to someone in the New York Post, which shows you have hatchet men that do work for them. Just read a lot of the stuff that comes out of there, you'll see it. So that all transpired. I mean, you're lucky to even have this come out, Grace, because they were doing everything, and I mean everything, and we know these people, Grace, what they could do behind the scenes, especially in the police department.
Sorry to step on your words, but I heard from people that are working in the CID that the day the story came out, Delaney was telling people in the CID, I'm going to get her fired, which is laughable. I'm a freelancer. You can't get me fired. But I want to say luckily, but it wasn't luckily. Luckily, my editor had killed another huge story of mine earlier this summer. And I said to him, you can't do this again. You really have to have my back at some point. And I kept trying to show him what having someone's back looks like. Like after Delaney called him and threatened him with lawsuits and told him to GF himself, which even I have never said that to my editor. I couldn't believe she said that to him. But he literally texted me and said, this person just called me and screamed at me and said that they would never work with me again and I could GF myself. And I sent her an email saying, how dare you? We gave you every consideration. We bent over backwards. We sent you lists. We waited. We delayed the story 4 or 5 times for you. And we know you leaked the story. And how dare you? Please, you owe my editor an apology. I tried to show him this is how, we keep each other's back. And I think in the end, I know they scared him. City and State is not New York Times. We have, lawyers we can turn to, but we're not a huge organization. We don't have a lot of money to spend on things like litigation. And, it's also a drag. We want to get our stories out. So we try and produce them very carefully. And I know my editor was very, very worried about this story. I know his worries were salved because I have people that I can call. Luckily, I've built a reputation because of the pieces I've written and the work that I've done, even in the advocacy community before I was a reporter again. Like Norman Siegel and, even Eric Sanders and other lawyers and the people on the education committee that write the education laws and understand that exemptions wouldn't be there if there's another law out there like the NYCRR that prohibits unlicensed psychologists from making these evaluations. I had a lot of people I could count on. And so my editor was really happy with all that proof. And he felt a little better. But yes, there was no small amount of enormous pushback. Personally, for me, being on the short end of the stick when it comes to turning to the NYPD when I needed them, when I was at my nadir about a decade ago, I understand what it's like to have people that kind of aren't all right there working against you in the department. And even, more recently, as far as the implications for this, the kinds of people that pass. For instance, in my story, I wrote about a candidate. And believe me, that quote from Dr. Gonzalez, who used to be the deputy commissioner of training,
yes,
was golden. And I had it confirmed by someone else there that said that, at the academy, a couple weeks before graduation, they would give everyone a blind survey and have them write the name down of whoever they thought the person was that was most, or what Gonzalez's quote was not fit for service, but the people they thought were just too crazy for service. And it would always be the same name. And that particular person that I wrote about, who went back to psych, was cleared, came back to the academy, graduated, went out into the field and crashed his police van. This is a detail in the story that got cut out just because it was too wordy. Rest in peace, Detective Gregory Purvis was in that police van when that kid had and I knew Gregory Purvis. He lived 2 blocks from me. He used to hang out over in front of my house. I live up in Washington Heights, in one of those old houses with the big porches they built for the TB epidemic. And so people like to hang out on these porches. And Greg used to come over here all the time. And I remember him with that big cast on his arm after that crash. And it really debilitated him. And that person that crashed that van had no business being on the force. And it just makes me so angry. You don't know how much that set Greg back. You don't know what went on in his mind. And just personally, I'm no small amount of enormously annoyed that this particular piece of public safety has not been evaluated. If you ask me, I doubt that the NYPD was even running analysis. I doubt that they even knew that so many people in that unit had been there less than a year. I doubt that they knew that the turnover was 2.5 years. I doubt that they knew that there was all this overtime. And if you look at the salaries, people in that unit aren't even being paid at the top of the salary unit. So whether it was cost cutting and it also served other purposes, the structural racism purposes that people quoted in the story, like Sanders, or if those two things were not mutually exclusive, more reporting is to be done on the subject. But from my personal experience, it's important to have people a year and a half out of college with only a semester and a half of grad school making these assessments. And if I were a police, there's no way I would go reveal everything to one of these young people. I'm in my early 50s, and if I had been policing for 30 years and all of a sudden was in a traumatic event and had to go talk to one of these people who clearly is a kid, but they were calling themselves a psychologist, I think I would be reticent to share everything, just because, as an adult, you don't share everything with younger people. You don't feel confident that they'll be able to process it all. I mean, we could really go down a rabbit hole talking about that. But regardless of if there's laws or not, I don't personally think the department should have been doing it. And I don't understand why they haven't been trying to comply with the law. And I don't understand why, even in the medical unit, they're not, that the unions haven't been flagged, that there's not something in the union contract that prohibits this. And then the final thing I wanted to get in on the show is I checked, and all the other agencies in New York City use fully licensed psychologists. So even if there is this exemption, like we said, we're giving the department the benefit of the doubt for people that are not in police assessment roles. So, people at the Department of Correction or people at ACS, or even the law department has a couple psychologists on staff, and the fire department has 5 or 6 of them. All of those, there's not even a part of the NYCRR that requires fully licensed psychologists to tend to those employees of New York City, but they do it anyway. They only use fully licensed psychologists. So I think that there's a lot of questions just beyond the legality of it that the department has to answer to. And as far as, you call Inspector Tish the soccer mom, I want to give her the benefit of the doubt too, because as a woman, I want to see her succeed. Not all the things that she's done I've been happy with. I know when she was in charge of technology, there was all kinds of things that looked weird, the Nextel cell phones and Palantir and Cobalt. There were a lot of different things that happened back then, but I want to see her succeed as police commissioner. But the way it looks like to me objectively, and again, this is me saying this from my own kind of stepping back and looking at the situation, I feel like maybe she was pushed by someone to play up the reversals as a scandal so that she could look like, Harvey Keitel from Pulp Fiction, that she's the one coming in and cleaning everything up. And so whoever's pushing her to kind of highlight those things and push them out there. And that DCPI was dripping things out into the press about Inspector Anderson because his interview with IAB made it to the press within 2 days of that interview. Only someone very high up could have been leaking that. So it's very clear that the department is leaking things. And I wonder if whoever is encouraging this kind of press campaign to make Commissioner Tish look like the cleaner of corruption, I wonder if there was maybe more haste that should have been drawn and a little more investigation before jumping to conclusions about this, because objectively there are many more problems, like I said before, and I'm going to I'm tired of the sound of my voice, so I'm going to put a pin in it after this. I really feel like this was the wrong example to use to try and make Tish look like the big cleaner. I think she got really bad advice from someone. I don't know, maybe she has a campaign consultant on the background, maybe she has higher aspirations than 1PP, and maybe they're looking for other things to sort of heighten her political profile, but I don't know. I have no idea, but it does feel like maybe there should have been more haste and more investigation, because there's so many other things in the candidate assessment unit. And it's not just me saying this, it's the people that have fled the department after being there, for a few years, or even someone was there for only 10 days and said they were happy to leave the department. So it's not just me saying this.
They can't even get people to be on the job. It's so bad. So first I'm going to say this here. Special Hagen, who is a lawyer, says, to make sure they can't wiggle out of this, the verbiage on this should make clear what it entails to be a fully licensed psychologist and what these folks were missing. So that's someone from a legal background telling them what the job should be doing. And also shout out to Frankie Pagliucci, who gave $9.99 to the Sal Greco show, which thank you, Frank. I'll be having espresso on you later. He says, make due process great again. And I wholeheartedly agree with you, Frank. This is unbelievable. And the way, and again, what you had to go through, Grace, I commend you, because I know the pressures of how these guys work behind the scenes. So I understand that part. I did ask you about the 50,000 hours in overtime, because these people clearly say psychiatrist on their, when you pull them up in the city and under their official title, when they're not a licensed psychiatrist. So they're making overtime.
Psychologist. Sorry, to correct you, psychologist.
Psychologist says it on their title, psychologist. So they're psychologists making overtime. Wouldn't a New York City taxpayer have a problem? The fact that you're not even licensed, and you just said something else. People talking to them. If you're a police officer or a candidate for the job, or the janitor has to sit down, and for whatever reason, you're an NYPD personnel or anyone in general, you're sitting down talking about personal things and your health issues with someone who's not licensed, which I believe is a felony in this state, by the way, in New York. So you have state issues, state crimes, and federal crimes being committed. And the fact that there are 50,000 hours of overtime you could trace back, which I'm sure is even more and goes back even further, that's disturbing, because the taxpayers deserve to know better, especially New York City residents. I'm sure they don't want to pay to have unlicensed psychologists evaluating people, which is, I can't believe that. But I mean, man, that goes to say a lot.
Like I said, the department believes that there is this exemption, which, by the way, expires next year on June 26th, June of 2026. The department is pointing to this exemption in the state education law that allegedly says any state, municipal, or federal employee is exempt from licensure as long as they're employed by the department, a salaried or per diem or hourly. They can call themselves a psychologist. And, whether or not that's true, and like I said, let's just give it to them. It is a crazy law. And, when you dig into it, there's a long history of people not agreeing with that interpretation of the exemption. But we'll give it to them, no problem. Even if that's true, whether or not the people that made those assessments under those exemptions did something that was criminal or not is something for the lawyers to sort out. So like I said, I really don't want to get involved with what was criminal, what wasn't criminal. Let them argue these exemptions, let it all come out, let the lawyers discuss it in court. That's not my place. But at the end of the day, nobody knew about it. It was a practice that I think easily could have been solved. If they're paying all this money in overtime to these people to work 80 hours or 90 hours a week to get class sizes pushed through, why don't they just pay more people that are real psychologists, fully licensed psychologists to do the job. This is New York City. People want to come to New York City. Why are they only recruiting at SUNY and locally? There's got to be all kinds of people at all kinds of educational institutions around the country that would love to come to New York City and work. It doesn't make sense to me. It feels like they need to be working harder to analyze, harder to get the demographic profile out. Why don't we have answers about how many people pass the psych exam that are considered Latino? How many people are considered white pass the psych exam versus Black? These are things that the department should be able to answer to when they're asked. And I think that the fact that they haven't even kept track of those things is very telling. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that this is something I don't have enough experience to know that this is the biggest, corruption scandal. I'm going to take your word for it. I'm very flattered by you saying that about my investigation. Thank you. But it was all right out there. The department very well, if they didn't know, there's something called negligent indifference, which, that's another part of the federal rules that the lawyers can go after. If they didn't know, they should have known. And negligent indifference is a real thing. So, let the Eric Sanders and the Norman Siegels and the Ben Crumps and the, whatever lawyers want to be involved, let them sort it out. But at the end of the day, this has real consequences. And it seems like such an easy thing to solve and to address. And thank you for complimenting my ability to be stalwart. I was really raised by people, a long line of whistleblowers. I could go on and on about how I was kind of raised to operate in environments of panic and haste. I used to run the world's best photojournalists in and out of war zones around the world. And I was known for keeping my calm, although, my own experience with the NYPD has made me less of a calm person over the last decade and a half. But I really am proud to be able to say that I'm happy to lead the fight for change just by producing data that's out there for anyone to look at. Well, you have to have really good Excel skills, but to anyone to look at and evaluate. And shame on the department for not knowing about this. And also just shame on the department for trying to push back and to bully us. I really hope to hear in the coming days a positive response from City Hall and a positive response from NYPD about not just how to solve the problem in the CAD, but also for a psychologist department wide. They don't need a law to tell them that having kids that are a year and a half into their graduate program evaluate police when they're sent to be reevaluated is wrong. It's not right. These people don't have the skills and the acumen. And if you talk to people that are specialists in police psychology, like I linked in my story to an outfit run by Dr. Kelly up in Albany, who for 40 years has been doing police psychological profiles. There's a whole industry behind training people to be police psychologists. And other police departments, not just around the state, but around the country, adhere to all those guidelines. And they require people to do, for instance, ride-alongs with NYPD and to have a certain number of hours on the street, understanding what police officers do before they can evaluate them. And from my research and my speaking to people in the CAD, none of them did anything like that. And also, I'm not trying to get any of those psychologists in trouble, any of those student psychologists in trouble. They were specifically told when I asked them about the licensure that because they weren't doing real psychology, quote unquote, because they were just doing assessments, that they were exempt. And, there's nothing anywhere out there in any regulation that says that. That's just what they were being told by their managers in either the CAD or the medical unit, that they were exempt, in the CAD, not the medical unit. And that's just a lie. So these kids, they didn't know that they needed to be fully licensed because their managers told them that they didn't need to be fully licensed. And that's another problem. You can't just interpret the law any which way that fits your particular circumstance. And over, we've seen the NYPD do that. From, I can name so many examples of the way that they withhold people's phones after charges against them have been dropped when they're arrested, their electronics. I even remember the NYPD and the law department trying to say that they could block anyone they wanted on Twitter, because when someone responded to a department tweet, that their speech was converted to the department speech. I mean, I could go on and on and on. This is what they do. And that particular kind of, twisting and manipulating of laws, people see through. And if you want to be a police commissioner that's ushering in a new reign of transparency and anti-corruption, that's not the way that you let your lawyers behave, and not the way that you let them go on the attack.
No, I can tell you this, that the soccer mom and her group there, John Shell and all these, John Shell, who's the, there it is on screen, what he has to say on social media. He's the chief of department, his staff, along with many other staff, the minds, we'll say, legal bureau, allegedly all came together last week over your article before it came out, and they were brainstorming this. They didn't come up with the exemption, Grace. They didn't have it, because if they, knowing these people, every single time, Grace, you've seen anything, whether they're alleged to have done something in the media, they have this smug arrogance about them. They come out, well, we're citing this and we're much smarter than you, and this is our position. They don't have a position right now. Their position is to go to a reporter from the New York Post and try to deflect and help them. And even that blew up in their face, because they don't have an answer for the exemption still. You could cite what they were saying to you, but that law only applies to the education department. I think also the Office of Mental Health and Hygiene. It doesn't say municipalities. The NYPD is not on that list. That's where they're stuck, and they know it. And unfortunately, they have all these lawyers, like I said, legal bureau. We're talking about 20 people that get paid around the clock just to try to either deflect, control the narrative, defend the police department, defend their officers. They have not come up with an answer to your article at all. Your questions, what you're saying, they don't have an exemption. They would have said it already. They're silent. They said, here's an exemption, and then that was it. They go, but where does it say NYPD? They have nothing else to say. If this was true, what we were trying to give them the benefit of doubt, they would have said it already, because they're arrogant, smug people. A lot of these lawyers over there in the police department, legal bureau, they think who the hell they are. Some that were cops, some that aren't, that, now they're in a higher society. They always have an answer, and you stump them because they don't have an answer. Their answer is, oh, there's an exemption. Yeah, but it doesn't apply to the police department. So then what? But they want it. I mean, that's a little trick. It's a trick of the trade, kind of confuse everything and make it look like they know, but it doesn't exist. It's on paper. It doesn't exist. I have a question for you here, Kelly, from Marlon Bethel, who's with us in the Finance and Filthy. Said, does Grace believe the malleability of unlicensed psychologists, students, and young people are why the department uses them, meaning they lack life experience and professional experience?
I believe that Eric Sanders answered that question in his quote. The people that are in this role, they can't pass their boards, they can't go anywhere else and work. I think that they are a little malleable, and it seems like the department does throw cases to them that they need those people to figure out what to do with. Wink, wink, nug, nug. And I kept hearing from psychologists that the department expected them to understand how to work in a quote unquote gray area. And that just means, the psychologists doing these assessments had to figure out what the department wanted them to do with it in some cases. And that's telling when people said that to me, that there wasn't enough guidance and working in a gray area was very difficult for them. That means, they didn't always really understand what they were supposed to be doing, what the department wanted them to be doing. And there was this implication. One psychologist even told me that they had to do their evaluations depending on who was supervising them one way or another, meaning supervisors all had different ways of evaluating candidates. And the people doing the evaluations had to figure out which supervisors did things one way and which supervisors did things another way. The example I was given was, women that have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted, oftentimes that was counted against them by CAD because it was a traumatic event, and the department may or may not have felt like they could get over that and move forward in the field. But the Department of Corrections is filled with people that had tried to be a police before going to corrections. And because they had a history as a survivor of sexual violence, they were dinged. But there were certain supervisors who didn't feel that precluded them from being police. And the same with the situation where certain people were precluded because as kids, when their parents were going through divorce, they were ordered to do a psychological evaluation by courts. And one of the red flags for CAD is if you've ever had contact with a psychologist or psychiatrist before, you have to look at that person carefully and make sure that whatever, drew them to the psychologist or psychiatrist in the past, that they've overcome that. And some of the supervisors allegedly never felt like people could overcome those situations, and some of them did. And the psych ones, the non-supervisors had to figure out very quickly, how to grade their exams, how to grade their evaluations, depending on who would be supervising them. And when I heard this, I just, talk about arbitrary and capricious. And, you're talking about people that are still trying to be psychologists and take their boards. And I mean, that's a lot, plus all the overtime and the pressure. It just seems like not really the way to be running that department. And then especially you've got this added sprinkle of every once in a while, these young people are told to go out and evaluate people after traumatic events. So they have that pressure as well of making sure that they do that work correctly. With the lack of supervision, I would be on pins and needles if I were making those assessments myself. So, it didn't take a lot of work to get people to talk to me. Some people did block me, I noticed, when I got a hold of certain psychologists that used to work in the department's phone numbers. I did notice that word got out that I was making phone calls because some people did block me. I want to loop back to something that you said before, if you don't mind, about how the department reacted. One of the strategies used was Delaney called my boss and kept trying to infer that because the Reverend McCall, who I quoted in the story, she kept trying to insinuate to my boss that McCall and I had conspired and cooked up the story together, insinuating that since we were both formerly incarcerated people, we were criminals and we were trying to sabotage the department with this crazy story. And that's just nuts. I only spent 4 days in Rikers. I got the charges dismissed and sealed. I do not have a record. And he kind of did his time, and now he's a community leader. And just because we're both formerly incarcerated people doesn't mean that we sat around in the background trying to cook up the story. I was tremendously insulted by that insinuation, and I let my boss know that. And I asked him to push back, and he knew it to be a lie because I didn't even know that Reverend McCall was working on this issue until after I spoke to 4 or 5 different police union leaders, and they pointed me to him. So, that I thought was very ugly. And as you said, it was just another strategy. I too heard that people at 1PP were huddled up on the top floor last week. And, I heard all that, and we heard the machinations. It's just the level of pushback and acrimony towards myself and my editor, as you said, was completely anathema and unnecessary and not the way to go if you're trying to be the transparent police commissioner, the new branded police commissioner.
Yeah.
I don't even know if the police commissioner was that involved. Maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. I don't know. I can't say.
The soccer mom that has zero idea how the culture of this department is. The problem is you need someone who's in charge that actually knows the culture, because she doesn't. Even though she worked there, she's never worn a uniform. Obviously, they're having these meetings, things going on behind her back. Wink, wink, John Shell and Kaz Daughtry. So she has no idea what's going on around her. And then here she comes trying to reinvent this wheel. This is really bad. And unfortunately, she's going to fall on the sword because she's the police commissioner. It could be other people. This guy, Benoit, he keep hearing he's such a great guy. Such a great guy that not only is he involved in this, he also was having these telephone message transfers during the Madry debacle with, you mentioned Quatisha Epps, right? They were having... You can't just get transferred in New York City Police Department. You actually have to go through the personnel orders. That wasn't going on. They were just calling the telephone message which is something Benoit, he's chief of personnel, would be in charge of. But we're not even going to touch him because he's a good guy. So forget about the corruption. That's the NYPD model. And to your point that they were trying to say, well, you were incarcerated and Reverend McCall's incarcerated. Jimmy Rodriguez, the self-admitted criminal mob associate that owned Con Sofrito, where they all party with, I guess him and his cronies and all those guys are fine because they still hang out. By the way, Chief Matarazzo, who's in the police academy, had her hand in this whole fiasco too because of Epps' nephew. She just was there like a week before the guy decided to have a major stabbing there. I mean, here he is with Eric Adams. So in this case, Grace, they saying arbitrarily, well, we don't like you because you're a criminal. We don't like that you have a record or you were put incarcerated. But this guy did the same thing, and it's fine. He's okay. So they're picking and choosing just like they do with this. It's all arbitrary, and it's funny they won't even give you the demographics involving this, by the way, of who and what they were doing for the last 10 years. I have another question. If you mind, Grace, is from Marlon again.
No, not at all. And I have a couple more things to say. Just give me, when you after this question, if you don't mind me commenting a little.
Yeah, sure. So he asked, does Grace believe that some of those unlicensed psychologists actually failed their psychological exams and yet remain doing their work in candidate assessment division? And he means the failed psychological license exams.
Is he talking about the psychologists or the candidates?
I believe the question here said, fail the psychological exams and yet remain doing their work in candidate assessment division. So for those unlicensed psychologists, that's what he's asking.
So I really don't know. There is, I believe to become a psychologist, you do have to have an interview, as well as passing boards, with the Department of Education. I'm sorry, the FDNY is coming by. And I don't know how many of them have failed their boards and their Board of Psychology interview. I don't know. Only the Board of Psychology would know that. I don't know. I do know that there are several people still working to do candidate assessments who have tried to take their boards several times and not been able to pass them. And that's why they're still unlicensed. So I would say that it's very likely that it's true that people have also not passed their psychological exam. But I don't know. I didn't get data. I did put a FOIL into the Board of Psychology, and I asked them numerous times for comment and didn't get an official comment. But I did speak to people at the Board of Psychology, and they did tell me that this was a problem and that it was being worked on at the highest levels. So I expect the board will come out with a statement. I hope they will, or maybe they won't, but I know that they're aware of this. This leads me to something that you told me last week, that you knew someone that used to be a former investigator for the Board of Education. And he said, this is crazy. This totally isn't allowed. I hope you get him on your show. That would be a great person to interview. But I wanted to loop back to something that you said about, you keep calling her the soccer man. I don't want to rebuke you for calling her the soccer mom. I wouldn't call her the soccer mom. She really, like I said, like there's some things she's done some things that I don't like, but overall, as a woman in that position, even though she doesn't have a lot of experience, she holds her own. And like I said, I wish her the best. I don't want to say that I wish her the worst. I hope she doesn't fall on her sword. The department really needs some stability at this point. And so I hope that, that this situation is treated with the seriousness that it needs to be. And then about the something else you were saying about the supervisors, but at least maybe not that important to add right now. I might not add that point. But again, I really thank you for having me on your show. If there's more questions, I'm happy to answer them. But
sure, yeah.
I'm not quite sure I have more to say.
No, I got a surprise in store for everyone here, and you're gonna like this one. But before I do that, Special Hagen chimes in again. She says you have to pass the EPPP exam and do 1,750 hours of supervised work. They may claim that they are doing the hours on the job and have passed the exam. if that's their claim, though, isn't there the job of somebody in this police department or some lawyer somewhere to go, oh, they did pass it? You need actual documented proof. I don't think word of mouth works. But apparently, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised with these people. Is it's like, they don't do their due diligence. They have arbitrary standards with things. Yet this is an equal opportunity employment. I mean, you're not supposed to be doing it. But clearly, you've seen the mistakes over and over and over again. And I can't believe they would just say, yeah, that psychologist, they said they passed the exam. All right, well, they're hired. They're good. Because then I would be creating another problem. But you also said that they allegedly only have one supervisor for all these people, just one.
No, I didn't say one. And actually, I put in I sent you the link, and I also put in my story the ratio of supervisors to unlicensed psychologists month by month. And in some points it's like 6 to 1. It varies. I really did it month to month because their staff varied. It's a very volatile situation to have people coming in and out. Like, how do we even get someone trained if your average amount of time is 2.5 years? But I really wanted to know, not just year by year, but month to month, what's the ratio of staff to supervisor? And it varied. Sometimes it was like 14 to 3, sometimes 1 to 5. But it's all there. It's linked in the story, and I also sent it to you. It's a tab past the spreadsheet that you were looking at that has the different columns that show the name and whether they're licensed or permitted and when they started working for the department. There's a tab in there that also shows the ratios if you wanted to look at it more closely. But having all those people doing all that overtime does not contribute to a sound, steady, comfortable work environment for people that are already under pressure and they don't quite understand, all the different requirements that they're supposed to just kind of magically get. That's a problem. And that's, where you start getting in the arbitrary and capricious realm, because these decisions are being made, by people that are under enormous pressure. If I were a lawyer handling a class action, I might, focus in on, okay, what are the months that people had to do, 90 assessments a week, and look very carefully at those assessments. And is a person that I'm representing amongst that group of people whose assessments were done when there was a crunch to get candidates' assessment classes numbers up so that they could fill the academy classes. Those are all details for the lawyers really to sort out, but it doesn't look good for sure, having all this overtime. It just shows that these people were meant to, I don't know, be like a representative, that they were just checking the box. And it doesn't seem to hold any kind of water or muster for anyone that I've spoken to. People that might even, I don't want to hypothesize what people are thinking at 1TP.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm just I'm stating what I know. What they had all these meetings. Like I was saying, they were throwing around their ideas. They have all these lawyers. They don't have an exemption. They didn't come up with anything. They have no answer. Actually, here, HXC.
I'm sorry, Sal. If you don't mind, I just want to interrupt you. There's one thing I wanted to say, and I forgot to say it. This story had been pitched to the Daily News apparently before they brought it to City and State. And when they pitched it to the Daily News, it was the Reverend McCall that pitched it to Graham Raymond at the Daily News. And they knew, because they had a phone list from the current CAD, how many people weren't licensed. And they could tell that there were 4 or 6, I don't know, it's either 4 or 6 people that are currently working there that aren't licensed. And they pitched that to Graham, and Graham took it to his editor. They asked DCPI, and DCPI gave the Daily News the same response that it gave me. Oh, we're exempt. And the Daily News bought it, and they didn't work on the story anymore. But because I had already, before I asked DCPI for an answer, and I didn't even know that the Daily News had been pitched this by the Reverend. It was someone else. Derby actually pitched it to me, or pitched it to my editor, Ralph, because Derby had written an op-ed for City and State before, and my boss, Ralph, really liked Derby, so that's why he paid attention to him. And when he emailed him, he assigned it to me because he took him really seriously and had a rapport with him. But the fact that DCPI had already known about this before I even emailed them and thought that they could just kill the story with this terse answer, oh, we're exempt, instead of addressing the problem the 6 weeks before I even started working on it, they just dropped the issue as if, oh, we killed the story. The Daily News isn't going to address it, so we don't have to worry about it. But they didn't start taking any steps to solve the issue. Instead, they kept posting, job descriptions for people that were unlicensed to come into that unit. And I find that to be very telling, that they just kept operating the same way, even though a reporter had been sniffing around about the issue. And again, that's called negligent indifference. And any good attorney will eat for the rest of their lives out on the negligent indifference of the department for not addressing these issues.
Interesting. I do have one comment here, I think is a comment of the day. It's HXC says, cops getting overtime slips scrutinized by their ICO, which is the Integrity Control Officer. Unlicensed psychiatrist, unlimited OT. LOL. And that's the sentiment of people that are going to hear this, is that the overtime's been scrutinized with cops and what they do and how they do it, if they make an arrest, and these psychiatrists, here you go. You're unlicensed, no problem, and like that's crazy that they're doing this. But you keep mentioning. I
asked, by the way, and the rate is $35 or $40 an hour for overtime, depending on if you're a Psych 1 or a Psych 2. But the way I did my calculations, I did it all at $40 an hour. But just FYI, that's what they make.
$40 an hour, and you had at least 50,000 hours. But that only entails that you only have a certain amount of time, which now we're finding out is even more extended. And they're already giving you issues with trying to give you, the demographic. They don't want to. They're all tight-lipped because they know, we got caught. That's what this really feels like and sounds like. But you keep mentioning lawyers, Kelly. So I've had one. He's going to come on right now. He's been waiting in the room. He's heard a little bit of this. Here he is, Mr. Eric Sanders himself. So, Eric, thanks for coming back on. I'm sure you heard a lot there. I don't know if you want to comment on anything. You want to get? I saw you've been posting a lot. You heard a lot there. So I don't know a little bit about a certain person that worked for the state education board here. So, without any further ado, Eric.
Okay, so let's just clarify this whole PPA Act of 2021. If you take a look at it, it's an administrative procedure. And basically what was going on prior to that act being enacted by Governor Hochul, what was happening is that you have all these different hiring practices from all these law enforcement agencies. So the purpose of that act was to have a uniform process for all of the law enforcement agencies so they can comply with the Municipal Police Training Council. That's what it was for. An administrative agency can't trump a law. And if you look at their memorandum, it specifically says a licensed psychologist. There's only one board that can license psychologists, and that's the New York State Education Department, period. There are no exceptions. And by the way, I searched all over for the exemptions. And if you take a look at, I sent down on Twitter this, and this is why I like to do this, because, I don't really use social media, but I use it for stuff like this. If you specifically look, right? See, even that, it says to be evaluated by a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist. Nowhere in this announcement or this policy does it say you're exempt or anyone's exempt. Matter of fact, you can always see the exemptions in 2022. And if you go to my Twitter feed, I actually tell you when it happens. And it doesn't mention the NYPD. If you can pull up the Twitter feed real quick, I'll just read it to you. It says right here. First of all, I want to tell you something about administrative agencies. The criminal justice is an administrative agency. And there's a case that I actually put out there so people can read it. Administrative regulations must be consistent with the legislative intent and statutory framework. They cannot expand or restrict the scope of a statute beyond what the legislature has authorized. See matter of General Electric Capital Corporation versus the New York State Division of Tax Appeals, 2 New York 3rd, page 249, 2004. So even if the NYPD wanted to interpret the PPA or the NYCRR as granting them an exemption, that interpretation would be invalid because no regulation can authorize the conduct that legislation has criminalized. Bam, that's your answer. Now, since everyone keeps talking about exemptions, I'm going to tell you what they are. Temporary public agency exemptions expired in 2022. Between 2018 and 2022, New York permitted temporary exemptions from licensure requirements for psychologists employed by very specific public agencies, OMH, OPWDD, DOCCS, etc., under Chapter 57 of the laws of 2018 and later Chapter 159 of the laws of 2021. These did not apply to the NYPD. And in any event, they expired in June 24, 2024. The NYPD has never been listed among the agencies for an exemption. And by the way, I went back and researched this. I went through the whole legislative history, all the changes from the time 6512, where it's a felony, it applies to all professions. You don't have a license, you're a licensed professional in New York, it's a felony. It's clear as day. If you look all the way back when the law was first enacted, all the changes I actually posted before, nowhere does it say the NYPD is exempt. Zero. Matter of fact, if you look, and that's another thing that came up, no one can use the word doctor unless you are licensed, because that would mislead the public to believe that you are a licensed professional. And let's talk about licensed professionals. If you're one of the licensed professions in the state of New York, the only way you can hold yourself out, you have to pass. For example, if you graduate with a degree in psychology, let's say you get a PSY, psychology, guess what you are? You're a graduate. That's it. You cannot say you're a doctor. You can't say you're a psychologist, because that would lead the public to believe that you are licensed within the meaning of the statute to perform those services. It's just like a lawyer. You graduate from law school, guess what you are? A law school graduate. You could say JD, but you certainly can't say you're a lawyer, because if you go out there and say you're a lawyer, guess what? That's an unauthorized practice of law. These laws are in place to protect the general public from people who are not considered safe to practice in the craft that they may have learned in school. Because all people that go to school don't eventually get licensed. And that's the case here. And they keep talking about exemptions. I keep hearing this. Where? Point it out. And I'll be the first one to stop this whole litigation, the investigation. I'll stop it right now. But there are no exemptions. I searched this thing backward and forward. And guess what you come up with? No matter how many times you look at it, saying you're a psychologist is a violation of law in the state of New York. And one other thing, Sal, I want to say, I keep hearing about these kids. First of all, if you're going to school and getting your PhD, they're probably in their 40s. They're not 20-something years old. They're either in their late 30s, early 40s, sometimes older than that. And one of the things when you graduate, because I know when I went to law school, they did it. And yeah, although it's a different profession, you still have to be licensed. They tell you specifically, these are the requirements you need to meet in order to become a lawyer. Now that you graduate law school, you have to pass the bar, you have to pass the character and fitness, and then you have to get approved to become licensed to practice in the state of New York. And I'm sure they tell them that for the medical schools, the psychology schools, and all the other professionals, the same thing. So when people say, I didn't know, no, I don't believe that. That makes no sense.
I looked at like I said, the exemption, also the legislative jacket. Also, Grace had mentioned we lost her again. She must be having like a lot of Wi-Fi problems, but she mentioned in the article about not only about the exemptions, but everything she's pointed at, right? They don't have an answer for. These guys are making overtime, right? 50,000 hours she could find, which is even worse. And then these guys keep citing this exemption. Now, remember what I had said. Going back all the way, right? Because I think you just destroyed their whole argument, even if they say there's someone that we found out worked for the education board way back in the 80s. What do they have to say about this?
Let me talk about it. Okay. So and first of all, you think this is a new issue. I've talked about this since at least 2005. And I brought cases against the city. And by the way, I've settled cases against the city for this too. So this is not a new issue. It's just now I'm taking it on in a major way. And this all started because the police department tried to go after Anderson. That's how this all started. And then I started digging into it more, than became my interest. And I said, you know what? I think it's time to start litigating this. And then start looking at the fact that they were unlicensed and criminal. So this is not a new thing. The article didn't start it. Actually, I've been talking about this already. You can look up the cases. I have a history of this since at least 2005. So this is not a new issue. It's just now I'm using a different angle, because what I was using before is saying that the police department is not following the uniform guidelines of employee selection procedures, which is a UGESP, which is a federal law out of the case of Griggs versus Duke Powell, which basically says if an employer uses a tool, a diagnostic tool, a test, you have to meet these requirements. One, that is valid and is consistent, and it doesn't have a disparate impact upon protected categories: race, national origin, age, gender, and disability. Other than that, it's invalid. And the police department, even back in 2012, when I brought those cases, they immediately settled them as soon as it wasn't dismissed. Immediate settlement, more than $200,000 a piece. And that was back in 2012. This is a bigger problem, because not only do they not follow UGESP, guarantee they don't follow it, they don't follow the basic and licensing statutes. And now we know 55 or 74 is more than what, 3/4? That's more than 2/3 of the people who are working there. And now, since I've spoken to a person that just happened to be listening to the show, and he says, wow, this is interesting. You know why? Because when I was with the police department, I took a leave of absence. And guess where he worked? The New York State Education Department. And you know what he said? I used to investigate these kind of cases. And quote, unless the laws have changed since the early 80s, which they have not substantially changed, there are no exceptions for the police department. It's actually a crime to hold yourself out as a doctor or psychologist, or to assess, because that's part of assessment. If you look up 7601, it tells you assessments is a broad category. It's a diagnostic tool. If you're giving an opinion about someone based upon an interview that you shouldn't be doing solo, by the way, that they are doing, so they're acting as doctors, guess what that is? That's an E felony in the state of New York. The problem is most people never knew this. The employees, the applicants, no one ever talked about that. But now they're going to know about it now. So this is more than just having a podcast. This is performing a public service. And if the police department can point to one law or rule right now, I'll stop the investigation right now. And you know what they haven't done? They haven't pointed to the exception. And it's not the NYCRR. Read it yourself. It's an administrative policy. It says, hey, we have this hodgepodge way of looking at cops. And you know what? We should all look at them the same way, because if the NYPD won't hire them, they shouldn't meet the standards of all the other 600 some odd public police agencies in the state of New York. It should be uniform, not just everyone does what the hell they want to do.
It's just, and also I think because she mentioned Terrell Anderson's part in this, and he's being scapegoated like I've never seen before with this, and Benoit's being left alone, and that's the candidate assessment division, and clearly they used him as that point. That's what the soccer mom and them, that's what they want to do, is make him, he's the problem, rub the knife on him, and it's over. But meanwhile, what did he do wrong in this?
So let's talk about Inspector Anderson. So now that people have a basic understanding of the law, you tell me, how is an unlicensed person, even as Anderson, doesn't matter who the person is, how can they overrule a person who's supposed to be licensed in the practice of psychology? How can that happen? That by definition is illegal either, because that means he's acting as a psychologist or whoever else is doing that job. The whole system that they have structured is completely broken.
And arbitrary, because this is arbitrary. We've always discussed and it kind of criminal association came into this, because the way they were judging and doing these value judgments on Grace and anyone else, the reporting on this article and stuff. So all this reporting, are they making value judgments on people? And then how they do this as well. There's something that's in the DNA is the value judgments.
Think about it, Sal. Okay, so now a person who is a police officer. Forget about Anderson, it could be anyone. So now they look at it. By the way, they're not a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist. So they look at it and then they make a decision that either the psychologist is wrong or they have a different opinion. Their opinion is based on what? Training, education, and experience? What is it based on? Because according to the law, the only person that can make an evaluation of a person is a licensed professional, not a uniform member, not the chief, not the hoopah, not the I don't want to call her soccer mom. I'm not going to I call her the savior because she don't know a damn thing about anything as far as I'm concerned. All right. The bottom line is the only person that can give you an assessment is a licensed professional. That is it. That's what the law says. So anyone making an assessment that's not licensed will be violating the law. It's very clear. And I put a case up. It's called People versus Santee, SANTI. Take a look at it. Even licensed professionals that operate outside of their license specification, they can be charged with an e-felony. So there's case law that says this.
They're going against precedent. And like I was telling Grace, the fact that they don't have that smug, arrogant answer that they've always, I mean, we can go back. Where's the answer to this? I don't hear one. I hear dead silence from them.
They say the exemptions say, okay, point to where the law is that says what you claim, or rule that says, oh, it can't be rule, by the way. Remember, rules don't trump laws. It has to be a law. Okay? Show me where. If you look at that NYCRR, it doesn't say anything about trumping the educational law. Remember, you can't read word into things because you want to read into. But then again, we know the NYPD does this all the time with the case I use in your case, the RC case with the sealed statutes, the sealed criminal records under 16055. The police department read it. Well, it doesn't say we can't use them since we have them and we're supposed to seal them by statute. Since we have them, we could peek at them anyway until the court finally slapped them down and says, hey, you can't do this. They were doing that since at least the 70s. So is this any different? Of course not.
No. And this goes back to the early 80s. So there's over 40 years of precedent here that there's unlicensed psychologists. They don't have an answer. They don't have an exemption. They like to cite these things, get pretty, put their people on there, their hatchet men to try to spin this in the media. None of this has worked. And so far, silence from legacy media, silence from anyone that's big, because it's why they're on the side of these people. They got the NYPD. I understand that there's a lot going on. We don't. What we're trying to do, especially me, what I try to do is by highlighting this, you need to change. You're going to change NYPD. You have to change the culture from within. That's where it starts. This back the blue stuff and throw money and like let's hire a bunch of people. That's not going to work. You're not changing anything. You're just rearranging furniture and hoping for the best. I'm looking to change the culture. That's how it works.
Well, that's how it works. And remember, this is more than just a podcast of public service. The reason why I do this, because I'm a utilitarian by heart. So I believe in the greater good, which is why I do this stuff. Because most lawyers would never put this information out. They will hold it, right? And they would develop the legal theory behind the scenes, and they would bring a case, and they would try to get fees and a class action, all this stuff. Look at all the stuff for free I put out there. No one's paying me to do this. This is to inform the public because it's a public crisis, because we are approving people who shouldn't be police officers. We're also disqualifying people who should be police officers. So we're getting it from both ways. And by the way, there was a statement that was made, it was taken out of context. I didn't specifically say that it only affected blacks. If you remember right, I said it affects all people because the assessments are made of all candidates, black, white, brown, Asian, Jewish. It affects all across the spectrum. What I said was that also the ESP says that you're supposed to check to make sure there's not a disparate impact on the protected category. That's a lot less than saying it just affects blacks. That's not what I said. It affects everyone. You have people that come to me that are white that's been disqualified. You have people that are black that shouldn't be police officers. Look at those two morons that was in the transit district the other day telling the guy, you're not my title. I'm a police officer and you are just a cleaner. These clowns don't belong in no uniform.
you can't be saying
They may not know what I'm talking about, but I have my finger on the pulse of a lot of different things. It's just you don't rarely hear me talk except on this podcast. That's the only place I really appeared.
That's important. I got Frankie Pagliucci once again, another $9.99 to the Sal Greco show, which now I'm going to have like an abundance of espresso today, or cafecito. He says, "Thank you, Eric Sanders, for being a true defender of the voiceless." And I have to say, you picked this thing up from the mantle and are running with this very well. I don't know if you have anything to say, because I guess, like I said, Grace is no longer with us because she's had all kinds of issues with Wi-Fi. But what do you have to say for what she said?
I just want to say one thing. I'm gracious. I'm a gracious person, but I call it like I see it. All right. I'm putting it out there in the public so people can read it. And by the way, you can double check me. Why do you think I put it on the public? I'm not afraid of my work. Go research it and see what you can find. I guarantee you will not find an exemption in the education law, because that's where it has to be. It can't be any other way. Unless the legislators change that law, if you don't have a license to practice psychology, guess what you can't do? You can't hold yourself out as a psychologist. That means the titles or anything. And if you really read it, it tells you have to clearly delineate that you're not a psychologist. You have to say a person in training or trainee, etc. But you can't be on one-on-one interviews. You can't make assessments, because all that is violative of a criminal statute that the legislators wrote and that was adopted into law. It's not Eric Sanders' law. It says it right there in black and white. Just look it up. Education law 7601 tells you the broad categories of things that you could do that will violate the law. It talks about the titles. If you look up 6512, it tells you if you get engaged in unauthorized practice. And then 6513 says, by the way, you can't use that title. That's a misdemeanor. And if you allow 3 more people to do it, that's a felony. Not Eric Sanders' laws. It's right there in black and white. There are no exceptions for the NYPD. And if you look at the Municipal Police Training Council standard, it tells you that you have to be a licensed psychologist. So how is it that they're verifying? How can they send the paperwork to the criminal justice and say, we're in compliance with your PPA of 2021? They can't be in compliance because they're evaluating people that are not licensed psychologists. Excuse me, I know how to read. And then the EEOC, you can't pass the UGESP because it says in order for it to be a valid test, guess what it has to be? It has to be valid in the valid specification. If you have an unlicensed person, by definition, what does that fail? Validity. Bing. Come on.
Yeah, and I want to also state, Grace isn't with us, but when I did speak to her, she had mentioned that she did speak to someone in the legislative branch of government, and he was in there, the state senator. And of course, he's in charge of the committee. In order to change this law to make an exemption, it has to go through that committee. And you saw that he had stated in the article that this is very alarming and troubling. Why? Because they never changed it. It's never been an exemption there. See, it's right here. This is actually an assemblyman, Manny de Los Santos, this is the Assembly's Education Committee. They're the only people that could have this exemption everyone talks about. He has to set this. So he said it right here. It is disrespectful to the profession of students who have not yet finished their graduate degrees making these important assessments, and this practice needs to end. That's what he said, because she said to me, he has to pass. It's his committee. So anyone that keeps citing these exemptions, there's the guy that makes the law. That there has not been any exemptions, nor has anything passed through his committee and to the assembly, which would then be featured in a legislation session up in New York State, in Albany. So all of that falls on deaf ears for these people. I don't know, they're agenda-driven or whatever it is, but the facts are the facts. The fact is there is no exemption for the New York State Police Department.
And by the way, see, when I say this with this guy's like, he's really passionate about it. Yeah, because people rights matter. This is not a matter of gloating about it. This is a glaring problem. Now, what are we going to do about it? Because the purpose of all of us supposed to be professionals, right, is we're supposed to use our education for good, right? That's what we're supposed to do. Unfortunately, too many people use it for their own personal agendas, right? So we're supposed to see a problem. Now there's a problem. Okay, a problem's been brought to you. What are you going to do about it now? Because I made a FOIA request going all the way back to the 40s. I mean, to the 1980s, January 1st, 1980. Okay, we got a problem. Okay, now what do we do about it? How can we fix this? Because in order for, that means the New York State Education Department is basically sit there, they're dormant. They're not looking at these agencies and make sure these people are licensed like they're supposed to. They don't even spot check them, because if they did, they would have known this problem existed.
Yeah. And Tony Moore has a question. He said, Eric, is there a website where you can search and see if someone at the medical division is really a certified doctor?
Absolutely. Go to the New York State Education Department. They have a database for all licensed professionals. You all want to look at someone for those type of jobs, all those things, and they have the list of all the doctors, psychologists, podiatrists. I mean, they have a list of all the professions they manage. You want to look up a lawyer? You can look up a lawyer too. You can look up Eric Sanders, and I have people that like me, and I have haters, and I have detractors. I don't really care. It doesn't matter to me. I have a job to do. The bottom line is, you'll see me, Eric Sanders, when I graduate from law school. There's no public discipline, and guess what? He's in good standing, despite all of what people may say about me sometimes.
Yeah, no.
I'm a civil rights attorney. I'm supposed to shake things up. That's my job.
John, this is a great thing. And also, like I said, with Grace, I don't know if you have anything to say. She spoke for over an hour about a lot of stuff. There's some stuff. I don't know if you want to comment. She mentioned things that weren't in the article, and then the background of the browbeating behind the scenes with the soccer mom and her clique there. Well, so I don't know if you have anything to say about it.
I'll say this, right? See, I remember when the article was going to first come out. I mean, I kind of knew about it, but there was some talk on whether someone tried to contact you. I talk to reporters all the time, and I kind of hold a lot of things back. In particular, I kind of stopped giving reporters stories because they live and they survive on stories. Right. But I feel like the stories that they write, they're concerned about writing it for their purpose, even if it's for a greater good. So when the New York Post was reaching out, there was some scuttlebutt of who leaked it or whatever. And one of the things, when you get involved in these kind of things, they're highly political, highly political. You have to be ready to deal with these people, because you're dealing with the government, and when you deal with the governmental agencies, what can they do against you? They can try to undermine you, try to get you fired, all these different things. And I said, as long as you stick on the facts and the truth, it doesn't matter what these people say. And I'm not giving no one the benefit of doubt. You said there's an exemption? Tell me where it is. You just can't say that to me. I'm not doing that. That's like these newspaper articles now. They are unknown source or a police source. No. If they work for the agency and that's the official position of the NYPD, they should say, quote the person who said it. Not allow that kind of stuff to slide. To me, that's unethical as a journalist. But they have no right to threaten her and do things like that to her, because she's just writing a story. It's not her legal problem. She's just informing the public, because after all, isn't that the First Amendment supposed to do? It's supposed to cleanse society, right? You write things, you talk about public corruption, you shine some light on it, it disinfects it, you're supposed to clean it up. She shouldn't have been subjected to that. No. But you're naive if you think they're not going to subject you to that kind of stuff, because you're talking about shaking up a system. A system is in place built on corruption. And I could use the word corruption, and I'll use it all day long, because that's what it is. And think about all the people who's been affected by this. You're talking about people who were approved that shouldn't have been approved, and God knows what they've done. Lawsuits, false arrests, beatings, sexual harassment, all the things that chaos they're causing. And then others, they go through their career no problem. And then other people who don't get sworn in. Why? Because you don't meet the right thing. And then you have other people, they have connections and hooks. They go, put that person in. Meanwhile, the person has suicidal ideation. There's a whole bunch of stuff I know that hasn't come out yet. But the bottom line is, this is a public issue that the city council, the mayor, and the governor, they should all be putting their heads together, try to figure out this legal problem, because this is a major legal problem. And I don't care who you talk to. If someone says the New York City rules and regs trump a law, and they tell you they're a lawyer, you should be very concerned, because rules don't trump laws.
Exactly. And neither do NYPD procedures. Because there's
Absolutely not.
some that think that. I think sometimes they let the NYPD procedural thing, institutionalize people, run rampant with that stuff. And meanwhile, the law is the law. The procedures are procedures, and the law. Same thing. You could fire anyone. Say, I don't like this officer hung around someone who was arrested in the 80s. We need to terminate him. That's great. But then when you face the legal challenge, you realize, that NYPD procedure doesn't fall in line with the legal guidelines and the law states. So this is where the rubber meets the road. I think this thing is explosive. You
want to test this out, Sal? I want to intro you. You want to test this out? Since they keep talking about exemptions, invite someone from the police department to come on and talk about this legal issue. Why don't you invite them? You're a journalist now. Hey, listen, you may not be a legacy guy, but you still have a platform. So why don't they come in, invite them to come on and say, there's a claim or there's an exemption of this legal issue. Would you mind coming to talk on it? I bet you they decline. Reach out to the New York State Education Department and see if they're willing to talk about this issue. They're probably going to decline. You know why? Because this is a major problem. You think they want to say that the NYPD hasn't been in compliance in 40 years or 20 years or even 10 years or 5 years? Absolutely not. Because all the political ramifications, this is what you're dealing with.
Yeah. And again, I was told that behind the scenes, that's the Eric Adams himself, who knows about this. The only thing they're worried about is that might affect re-election. That's what this, not about all these people that got affected. And this goes back to Eric's time on the job too. You were there with him. This goes that time and way before that. Yet you're worried about a re-election and not worried about the humanitarian. Like, this is for people. You're worried about re-election, not worried about the ramifications. Speaking of someone, I'm going to have this someone on the show as well. They said, what about people that were told by one of these psychologists that they have to get fired or whatever? They recommended termination. They lost their job, and then they go down a life of crime or commit suicide. What are you going to tell those families now after that psychologist wasn't even licensed that said that?
Well, see, that's the problem here. The problem is this has a ripple effect that is like monumental across the board. And we're never going to be able to quantify it. You know that, right? Like, I'm asking for records back to 1980. That's aspirational, right? Yeah. 40 years, you're talking about how many assessments they did, right? Couple 100,000, maybe over 500,000. Who knows? There could be 3, 4 per person. Some people try to go through the process multiple times.
And what's going to happen too is they'll probably say, like they have recently in Eric Adams' sexual assault case in his civil case, we lost the records during Sandy, because that's another thing they're like, we lost the records. The records we can't find them.
Between that and the fire that happened in Brooklyn at the time, the warehouse, but I thought they were trying to scan all the stuff and make it electronic. But then again, I guess assuming that all this stuff is like paper, like especially the old records, that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to scan all this stuff. So, it's a big problem. So now we're going to see what they're going to do about it, because the City Council Public Safety Committee should be having hearings about this and have the police commissioner, since she wants to be the police commissioner. And that's the problem in life. People always want the titles. They want the pinky rings. They want to walk around with the great part of it. Part of you being great is what? You have to deal with the tough parts too. And Correct. Ask her, is your department in compliance? What exception are you claiming applies to the NYPD? And they should have hearings about this, because this is a serious problem. Because if some lawyer does it, not necessarily me, who wants to know if I want to get involved in the headache of all this, of doing a class action and trying to figure it out? The bottom line is, if enough lawyers get their teeth on this, and it has merit, and it probably has merit, right? The bottom line is it could cost billions of dollars.
This could bankrupt the city.
Look at the teacher's case. The teacher's case went on for 20 some odd years with the teaching exams with the Board of Education, and that was all more than $1 billion. It was a couple $1 billion, matter of fact. And that was what, about 27,000 people? How many people in this? Just between, if you go by Grace's story, the article, she's able to at least assess that at least 25,000 people went through into the academy between 2015 and now. That's only what, 10 years?
Yeah. That's
add another 30 years on that. And remember, in order to get those academy classes, because I was trying to figure out what valuation or calculations I could come up with. And then, of course, I came up with, well, at least to get one candidate, you need about 8 candidates to get one. So even at those calculations, you have 250,000 people that were assessed. And that's if they were only assessed one time. If it's multiple times, that's 500,000 just on that group. And then add on the other years. Come on, it's astronomical.
Yeah, the damage this is, and the people that's affected is wide ranging. It doesn't really matter who's really in charge, because you just see the way this has been rammed through. This would be almost like an indictment of the administrations that have been prior, meaning, you know, de Blasio, Bloomberg, Giuliani, Koch, all these, because all this was going on underneath them, and they didn't do anything either. So you can't just say, oh, it's Eric Adams' fault.
No, of course not.
Eric Adams, he's guilty, but he's not as guilty in this as everybody is saying. You know?
We know for your case that we had a deputy commissioner of legal matters didn't know what was going on with whether or not an administrative subpoena can be used for a criminal case, or whether that violated the law. I mean, this is what we do. Everyone wants to have the big pinky rings. They want to have titles. Well, I'm the chief. I'm the this. I'm the that. And they don't know shit. Mm-hmm. They know nothing. They're just collecting money. But I guess it's a good gig if you can have it. Collect money for nothing. Yeah. Meanwhile, all the damage that's being caused that they get to walk away from, and all the broken hearts and broken dreams and all the broken careers and the suicides and every marriages and everything else that go with it, they don't care, because they're never held personally accountable for this garbage.
No, that's the problem. Nobody. I tell you, that's going to be the problem with this, and I think this needs to be put out front. I mean, I could just tell you, just yesterday I spoke to someone very recently. I had a nice little segment on the show because this person had a sexual harassment case being brought forward, and guess what? They took a gun and shield and sent her where? To the psychologist. So we're wondering now if that psychologist had a license. So you see how this affects many people in the police department. For all these people with this back the blue stuff, I mean, you got to understand, you have to change this from within in the culture. But this kind of stuff affects the rank and file that are on the street right now, because it's like a little thing dangling over your head with this. And there she is. That's who I was talking about. She was told to go to psychologist because she made a complaint about sexual harassment. That's the answer from the police department.
Well, if the public doesn't know, right, this is a game in the police department. So if you complain about something, if you're a woman, first of all, if it's a woman, they're all crazy, they're emotional, they're this, they're that. It's always the same bullshit. They send them to psychological services, and 99% of the time I've seen it, they don't belong there, right? So they go there, waste taxpayers' money, and they turn around, and the next thing you know, no duty status change. If you're a guy, or you talk about public corruption, male or female, you're talking about corruption, oh, they're crazy, they're this, they're that, they're this, they're that, wasting the taxpayers' money, and then guess what? They're fit for duty. And every once in a while, they'll go, oh, but they're this, they're that, they're paranoid, they're this, that. You go, where are they getting that from? Because they're telling you about corruption. Oh, I understand. Yeah. That's the little game. And see, the reporter talked about candidate assessment. I'm talking about all the psychologists in the police department. There's probably a handful of the licensed. And if they are licensed, they're endorsing unlicensed people. So guess what? To me, that is a violation of the law. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something.
This is this is in regards to of Jasmine Wall's story here, which we're highlighting, because look, they like to do this. We know this. They've been playing games. They play games, and the only thing that ever really holds them accountable are court cases. That's it. They don't change. The New York City Police Department or the state do not change anything unless they're held accountable in court. You could file they don't care unless they're in front of a judge and a jury awards somebody money, or they say, no, you have to change the law. That's the only way they're going to change it. So I know they have problems. I don't know how they're going to handle this. But clearly, they don't have an answer. And when this goes to court, I want to see what their answer is. Because if they don't have an answer right now, they can't formulate anything. Oh, it's an exemption. They can't cite it, and they have no other comment other than we're citing some exemption that doesn't apply to us. That's all they have. That all those hours of being at the meeting at One Police Plaza, that's the best that they could do. They're in trouble.
They should invite me to meetings, but they don't invite me to meetings. I mean, invite me. Listen, you guys need some help. Just sometimes in life, you have to get ahead of a problem, right? You see a problem, you go, this is bad. So what are we going to do about this? Are we going to fight it ad nauseum, or are we going to try to fix the problem? And this is what gets back to court case, so people understand. You know, many people, people just like the suit. No, they don't. No, they don't. The average person doesn't like the suit because the suit is cost time, money, and stress. Probably more than anything else, the stress. The bottom line is, you know why people sue? And when they come to me, and I've been doing this now more than 20 years. Can't believe I say I'm doing this long, but I've been doing it for a while. The overarching theme from all the people is, I talk to this person, I talk to that person, I talk to that, I try to resolve it, and then I said, I got to get a lawyer. It's a process to get there. People just don't sue because they have nothing else better to do. And this is another example of what I'm talking about. So they know there's a problem now. Instead of them saying, well, you know, it's an exemption. Okay, so you said an exemption? Point to in the law where there's an exemption. In the law, not the rules, the law. Because that act is a rule check. That's an administrative agency. That's talking about a rule, an administrative rule, how to manage hiring processes. No, we're talking about a law. That's what we want. Show us.
We're going to see what happens with this. I'm going to stay on top of this. We'll see if I could get anyone from the State Department and education, but anyone that wants to go on record and explain this to the taxpayers, to the residents, to the public, of what's going on here and what has transpired. I'll see if the police department. I doubt the police department wants to say anything about this. I think they know what's coming. There's an avalanche coming. They're gonna have to answer for this for 40 years prior. So I mean, we're gonna see with all of that. And I don't want, like, Terrell Anderson's been made a scapegoat. That's disgraceful, but it's not uncommon. He should be cleared of all this stuff. Yep. And there's so many other people that they should be cleared out of this stuff. But again, we'll have to wait for all this litigation. Eric, you have anything else for us? I don't know if you have.
Just one thing I want to say about Anderson. I don't represent Anderson at all. But if I was representing Anderson, the first thing I was attack is the legitimacy of the assessments. Because if they're unlicensed, by definition, he didn't do anything wrong.
No.
Because assessments are not even legal. So, I mean, I would attack that. I mean, I said, listen, and with these other police officers who are pending with the cases sitting in Supreme Court about whether or not they can retroactively. I love how people just come up with this kind of stuff. You retroactively invalidate what you did earlier. And it's not based on fraud, by the way. So that judge, and I'm certain that the PBA attorneys are going to run with this, even if they don't run with it fully, this issue is going to come up in that case because it has to. It makes logical sense. We go back and look at the assessments, and these candidates or these police officers now, they're police officers, and I think there's maybe 2 or 3 that's in the academy. Take a look at those assessments. If those assessments are by unlicensed persons or unpermitted persons, that's the thing I will argue. One of the things I will argue in front of the judge. The assessment by definition is unlawful, so it can't be even applied.
No, which would affect so many people. It's just is a mess. It really is.
Yep.
Like
the other cases with the lawsuits and the mafia cops and all the rest of that stuff. Those cases were still going on for years after they retire. And this may be one of those scenarios. More than 10 years after these guys retired, 20 years, they were still being sued. The city was still being sued. So it's not like there's precedent that you can't sue. In this case, we can take on years and years and years. This is probably one of them. Whether I'm going to be one of the attorneys that get involved in this on the litigation side, I don't know. I'm so technically being retirement, but I guess I'm not too much retired.
We can't retire. We still have our own case to go.
I do something else. All this fighting everybody gets to retiring after a while.
No, I hear you. But now, is there anything else you want to touch up on, or?
No, I mean that's really it. Just keep on, reading what's going on, and listen. The reason why I write a lot of stuff, and I say it every time, is I write it not for me. I write it for the general public, because one of the most important things you have to do if you're going to hire a lawyer is make informed decisions. And it's always good if you could find a little bit about the law and understand some of it before you hire a lawyer or decide if you're going to hire a lawyer. And if you look at the articles, I always put links to things like the cases and rules and law. So it's not just Eric Sanders writing things. I actually assess things. Oh, that's me in Washington. The bottom line is, this is what you can do. Become an informed consumer, because remember, the lawyer is not the boss. The lawyer is the support. The consumer is the boss. The lawyer is there to help the person along the way to make legal decisions, not to make them for you, to help you in making a legal decision. That's what the lawyer's job is.
There you go. I can't say it any better. People, you should be following Eric on X at Esquire_Sanders or ESQ_Sanders, and also the Sanders Firm PC.com. If you were affected by this, I suggest you give Eric a call. You could always call you want, but at least Eric is ahead of the ball here. You got to get ahead of the curve. He's ahead of that right now with this. And I would definitely look into, if you were seen by an unlicensed psychologist in the New York State Police Department, you, my friend, have a case. So I guess we'll be chatting real soon.
Okay. Thanks for having me again, as usual.
Thank you, Eric. There you have it. I'd like to also thank Grace, who she's had problems with the phone, so her location, but she's very brave to have done this. And you heard, and we've had Graham Raymond on the show and the Daily News, and you see how quick those editors, won that over and just killed the story right away. So without Grace's, bravery here, none of this would be coming out the way, because she had the guts to go out on a limb and do all of this and write about this and put all her heart and soul into this story and actually present this in a way where it's almost literally bulletproof the way it was presented. And it shows, a systematic, arbitrary position with the police department, and they don't have an answer. Their answer is not the exemption, because it's been blown out the water that there is no exemption. So now it's just going to go back to silence. Like that I could see this being their version. NYPD is, we're just going to stay silent. So if you can, she has X, so I'll give you her X. You can follow her on there. It's at Gracie Gorgeous. So it's at GRACIEE Gorgeous on X. Follow Grace and her great work. She's a freelancer, so she works, but she doesn't belong to these the city and state. So that's why they couldn't get her fired, which is ridiculous that they try to get her fired. So without any further ado, let me bring on the great producer, Jack. You salvaged everything. We had all these little technical issues, Once again, sometimes I wonder with all this technology, but you made this work somehow. So great job by you, Jack, in saving the day for the Sal Greco Show and the Finest Unfiltered Network.
Yeah, as a wise man once said to me when I was starting in the media business back in 2021, the show always has to go on. So whether it's making phone calls, troubleshooting logistical issues, pulling up websites to try and get some filler on, we're always trying to bring you guys the best content. I'm going to double down on what you said about Grace as well. Thank you so much to her for coming on and shedding light on her story. Any other journalists out there who are working on these types of expose type pieces, feel free to DM Sal, myself, the Finest Unfiltered on any of your media platforms. We would love to have you on and give you a voice as well. First and foremost, though, she kind of highlighted this weird predicament where a lot of journalists, reporters, media members feel like they're battling the institution that they work for because they have an agenda at place. And I saw that issue come up time and time again, where journalists prioritize access and having a good relationship with the police department, sanitation, fire, whoever they were covering, over giving factual information. And let me just say, that's something that really undermines the credibility of those who are going out and doing street reporting. It's sad to hear that her editor was giving her so much trouble in terms of publishing this story as well, because I've seen that happen in a number of different instances. So you just hope that the journalistic integrity that we once saw back in the 1880s, early 1900s with the muckraker era eventually returns, because we're not getting enough factual information, especially about the NYPD. We're seeing all these puff pieces about Edward Caban being the first Latino police commissioner, Jeffrey Madry being someone with a warm heart because he kneeled during the George Floyd riots. Yet when the FBI investigates both of those people, we're wondering, well, why was no information shed about their previous histories, their disciplinary record, the things that could have given the public red flags? It's becoming a really, really big issue in New York with factual information being brushed under the rug in favor of puff pieces that you would see out of a TV show or a movie or something like that. It's really troubling to me.
No, it is, and it's. You could also see how it was. Daily News had this originally, and you see how quick that editor just believed whatever the police department told them, and then we see how Grace picks up the ball and has to run up against all this stuff. The editor, the soccer mom, the DCPI, and then we all know that they have other cronies lurking in the background. And then, we need 10 days, whatever it is. They needed 7 or 10 days to respond to her because they were shopping this around to the New York Post to try to deflect and come up with their own narrative, which blew up in their face. That's just unbelievable. That just shows it took one brave person to come through to show everyone the truth. And that's all she did. Between her article and what she posted and showed today, this is, no matter how you feel about us as a whole or me personally, or Grace or anyone, the facts are the facts. It's right in front of your face. It's very hard to defend. I don't care if you're the most institutionalized individual that spent decades in the New York City Police Department and literally are like I don't know, call you like the quintessential Joe Cop. You cannot defend this. It's in no way, shape, or form. How do you defend it? And this goes beyond even the Joe Cop that would have been on the job, because this is at a much higher level of how they're hiring these people. You have the state and the federal departments that are involved. Like, this affects state and federal. And also, when you hear about who is involved, when I have someone that, by the way, this person that worked in the state, the education, they did over 40 years in the police department. Trust me, none of you out there's going to be very few that could put their resume up against this individual, who even had to, I believe, tell Bo Dietl back in the time he couldn't get into one of these exclusive units. That's how far back this goes. So this is someone whose reputation is impeccable and has a track record that very few could even put up against. I would say guys like Ray Kelly, he's in that kind of a prestigious, we'll say, NYPD folklore. And that's the kind of prestigious just gentleman has. So it is very alarming to hear this stuff. But it's time to have some kind of accountability. And I do get those calls, Jack, and you're part of it, that they love the Finest Unfiltered and what we're doing here. And we do things for what? We want to change the culture from within. You can't do it by someone tells me, we're gonna hire 5,000 extra cops. All you're gonna do is they're gonna add to all these bogus units. Nothing gets done. And when the precincts are short, they're going to say, we need more people. All their people are hanging out with them in these crony units and driving them around, all these chiefs and stuff. So what you need to do with that would be hire more civilians, because then the cops that are, supposed to be doing all out, or, 2 admin cops for the admin lieutenant, 2 females too. I wonder what's going on there. All this stuff going on. That's why you have these issues. It's one thing after the other, and it takes people that know the inside baseball to change this culture. We don't hate the NYPD. We don't agree with the individuals in charge, And that's because, Jack, those people went through the same things that I'm discussing, that John McCarry discusses, that Eric Dim discusses, that Marlon discusses, that Ron and Rob. But you know what they do? They just sit there and they're in charge now, and it continues. And you wonder why, when you could change this. This is the largest police department in the world, which, by the way, Jack, they've had a few shootings. Crime is down. Soccer mom, which is why she's the soccer mom. Crime is down. So don't let this one asterisk, 20 people shot in like one incident right down the street from Transit 32, which I used to, full disclosure, as a cop, we would take our personals up there because when I was a foot post on Franklin Avenue, Transit 32 was only a few years old. So we would actually go there and hang out in the lounge, whether it be for personals or for meal. I used to hang out there. No, I was in there with those cops. So the shooting happens up the street from there. So people are brazen enough to do that. Whereas when I was in the 71st precinct, that would never happen. You were not committing some crazy act like that. She's had 2 mass shootings inside of like 10 days, but crime is down. And the shot spotter, only finds fireworks going on. Apparently it's awful, whatever. Jack, this is alarming. And all we're trying to do is change the culture of how this works, because that's the only way it'll work. The men and women, the rank and file, are taking a beating. Those are you guys in the trenches. You can never forget about them. So if you do see one on the street, if you're watching this, go up to one of those cops, say, I'm on your side. I feel for you, and they'll definitely appreciate it, because they're going through what we discussed on the show today and many other issues, and they're not going to talk about this because they're not allowed to. But you should be out there thanking them just because they're out there dealing with this stuff, and it weighs on your mind too, especially after a couple of years and eventually 20 years when you can retire.
I can't even imagine if you even get to retirement, Sal, because they're talking about these pay increases and all of these things. But I'm assuming, I was speaking to someone familiar with the subject matter last night, actually, and he made the point to me, Jack, a lot of people who are getting pensions nowadays don't even live that long once they're off the job. I mean, a number of people are committing suicide. They're having health issues because they're working all these crazy tours for years where they're eating at McDonald's pretty much every night, and that starts to take a whole toll on their health. They're having stress problems, which are leading to health issues later in life. So, I mean, this is really deep-rooted and systemic in the department at every single level. They need some sort of organizational overhaul where there's independent monitoring for everything they do, whether it be the hiring process, where they're getting psychologists for $70,000 a year. I think when we were talking last week about this, Sal, I asked you, have you ever heard of psychologists being paid $70,000 a year? I mean, especially in a place like New York City, where you could be dealing with high profile clients, you're raking in 200, 300K in most of those types of jobs. So they're getting people at bargain rates to do perhaps one of the most important jobs in the department, which is evaluating the mental health of those that are entering and those who are already there. That's keeping the qualified and competent workforce that you already have happy. If you're not able to do that, you don't have much of a department to begin with. Also, I find it weird that the NYPD is very resistant to taste the taste of their own medicine. Like, they have all these drones, aviation unit, harbor. They're spending all this taxpayer money on catching the bad guys and bragging about it, even though there's shootings a block away from the precinct, which they're trying to ignore. Yet when someone talks about looking at public records, finding information about how many people were licensed versus unlicensed, they think everyone else is stupid and doesn't know what they're talking about. Grow a pair, guys. Like, just because you're the police doesn't mean everyone else is dumb and can't conduct investigations the way that you can. As a matter of fact, I think those that are doing so on the outside end up coming up with a lot better information because they're doing it from a more objective lens. And although they might not have an understanding about the foundation of the department, they can pick out factoids of information as well, just like any of the people internally can. So I've seen people who do a really good job watchdogging the agency, myself, Grace, there's a couple others who do a fantastic job in the media. Graham Raymond's a name that comes to mind. So have some respect for the job they're doing, because at the end of the day, they're helping the public as much as the police, who in many cases are deceiving everyone about what's actually taking place in New York City, saying crime is down because people are not getting hit with bullets, or because some of the most violent crime metrics might be down a little bit, or they might be up while the rest of crimes, petite larcenies, are down. So they're fudging the numbers and not being factually accurate with you guys. So you need to trust the people that are. People like myself, Sal, the journalists we've had on, because we're trying to create real wholesale changes that everyone can benefit from.
Exactly. Kind of like the 106 precinct where that was a whole fiasco. That guy got promoted, and like I posted, okay, we're going to use the word alleged, but okay, he gets promoted deputy inspector. Why? Because Berkeley Van Tull was fudging numbers, and he has no personnel in that command. It's one car, two cops running around for a whole precinct at night. You know how dangerous this is? It's super dangerous. So first week, he got promoted to deputy inspector. He's asking the admin's office and calling around to get that wooden board that says deputy inspector. Yeah, it's only for chiefs, guy. I don't know if you know that one. Then he gets a heads up. John Shell and Kaz Daughtry are coming. Why are they coming? I don't know. Maybe because you have a 31% spike in major crime in your command after you got promoted. So Jack, allegedly hightails it out of there in less than 8 minutes, got dressed and was out the door and wouldn't face the music. As bad as those two guys are, they're clearly going there because they, 31%. First week you get promoted. And I, of course, did a whole expose on this guy originally. That's a problem. See how quick he was gone? He was out of there. And yet 31% in his first week as deputy inspector. But they promoted this guy. Public safety, people right now, your safety is endangered. Cops are endangered because they're at low. Their staffing is low. Why? Because they don't civilianize these positions. The admin lieutenant's driver and whoever, the two females in that office doing nothing. The crime analysis officer. We have the traffic officer. He does the work upstairs, not the summonses. You have the TS, which could be manned by a civilian. There's so many positions I could go over. And I literally came up with 4 extra cars. Oh, the community affair cops that belong to the precinct, not community affairs. All these people could fill in. I came up with 4 extra cars just in that little, around. And that's just a temporary solution, because hiring 5,000 cops is not the answer. You need about 5,000 civilians maybe, because then you can civilianize many of these positions. And then this stupid all-out program, which is just taking cops that work in the street from the 106 and takes them to the 101 precinct for the beach detail. That should be all the admin lieutenant drivers and community. All these guys should be doing it. That was the intention of the program, by the way. So that's a problem. You reward incompetence, and everyone's silent on it. And we're looking to change that, obviously, because we're on the side of the working man and woman, a.k.a. the rank and file, who looks around and goes, who's there to help me? And some of these issues are political as well, Jack.
Yeah, and also just as a PSA to people who live in New York and are not aware of the way things work in other regions of the country, not every single police department has these administrative posts with people making upwards of $150,000 a year with overtime, who get to take home a car, work, pretty decent hours. I'm not going to say their jobs aren't stressful, because there is stress involved, but have relatively cushy assignments. I'll put it that way. Really don't do a whole lot of work and just kind of get to skate by. Not to mention all of these chiefs who have personal drivers and all these other types of bells and whistles, Craylo cars, all this stuff. Like, we're not filming an episode of Law and Order or Blue Bloods. Like, this is real life with taxpayer money. We need to be more calculated in terms of how we're using it, and really taking a hard look at the payroll and the budget. Because when I look at it, when Marlon looks at it, when you look at it, when all of us look at it and see these crooked numbers of people who are not doing a lot of work, not only does it look bad for the public, but it looks bad in the sense like, okay, how are all these shootings happening? How are there no cops down in the subway when crime is surging out of control, yet you have budgetary resources to pay someone $350,000, $200,000 just in overtime to drive around some chief? That does not make sense to me. Most chiefs at sheriffs and police departments in regions of the country are driving themselves around, and they're taking calls while they're driving. They're dealing with radio traffic. Like, they have a, God bless them. God bless their souls and the hard work that they put into their jobs. But they're really putting a lot of labor into it in a way that chiefs and the NYPD are not incentivized to do. When you have all these assistants and drivers and stuff, I would like to see what a lot of these people's day-to-day lives and responsibilities look like, aside from sitting in their office and eating Hershey Kisses while people go out on the street and make arrests. Like, what are they actually doing when you strip it down? I would love to see a day in the life video. I mean, Kaz Daughtry has become an expert content creator. Maybe he can give us an inside, behind the scenes look, day in a life in a chief's life.
For deputy mayor. Well, look, I don't know how much taxpayer money and resources are being used for his constant embroidery, his shirts, his videos. Someone's holding a microphone. Someone's holding a phone.
We need those expense reports, by the way, for the microphone, the cameraman, every resource that's being used for Kaz Daughtry. I want to see how much money is being spent on that.
On a government-funded account also. And his account, he has one on YouTube as well. That was another government-issued account. I mean, he's just wasting taxpayer money, and no one asks questions because you'll lose access. I mean, that's basically what's going on here. This is crazy. Jack, what's going on tonight? We got the 10-4 Tavern, I believe, and then Wednesday we also have the Executive Perspective and also Finance Unfiltered in the morning. You got anything on that?
Yeah, tonight on the 10-4 Tavern, joining Tom Joyce and Peter Forcelli, we'll have David Gonzalez, former U.S. Marshal with 50 years of experience. I can't remember hearing about anyone who worked in law enforcement for 5 decades. So that should be a fantastic show. And then tomorrow on the Executive Perspective, we'll have a friend of the show, Johnny Latanzio, retired second-grade detective from the NYPD's Emergency Services Unit on. So be sure to check out both shows. Like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you got to do. We have some fantastic content coming for you. So be sure to check it all out.
That's right, Jack. So thanks for that one. Listen, it's been a long one. There was a lot of information here. I'm sure you could. I would, ask that you would reshare this out and let this continue, because this topic, unlicensed psychologists, the NYPD, it's insane, and it has affected, if not hundreds of thousands, probably in the millions over 4 decades of between candidates and actual personnel. And I kind of went over at the end here about some of the things I see that's wrong in the police department. And yeah, maybe I wasn't at the rank of chief or whatever. Never, I don't know. You apply ranks to people because you take tests and people might think they're better than others. But really, it's the civilian that matters. You that watch this, you who are not even part of law enforcement or just a regular civilian, you're the only opinion that matters, because it's your tax money that's funding all of this stuff. And I don't think that rank and file police officers should have to be going through running the mill with an unlicensed psychologist for not just this year, last year, the last couple of years, at least 40 years. That is outrageous. So I will be back this coming Thursday. Tune in for that one. But as I said, tonight, 10-4 Tavern. Tomorrow, Finest Unfiltered, 8:05. Executive Perspective will be on tomorrow, 5:05, 17:05. And I'll be back at 1:05 on Thursday with another hot topic as usual. So thank you to all my subscribers here, all the listeners, all the haters. Thanks for all the comments. It's been a long-winded show, but facts are facts, and information needs to be disseminated. So thank you all again. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Check out 10-4 Tavern tonight, and I'll see you on Thursday. And I'll signing off from sunny South Florida, because as you know, it's a sunny place for shady people.
So this is a biblical moment. You know, when Jesus was on the cross, he said, God, forgive them, for they know not what they do. All these Negroes who are asking me to step down, God, forgive them. Are you stupid?